All right, well, we are back with an audio issue for what that is. Oh, let's leave that off. Let's leave that off for now. All right, guys, this is a big moment. There is a confrontation happening now in that's what we're going to call it. It is like a fourth Taiwan crisis, and we're about all of tonight is going to be a big broadcast, trying out a couple things, some audio changes. Hopefully there's less feedback and less fan noise. All sorts of things should be improved. This broadcast actually works. You never know until you're doing, because as I say, we're always building this so let's really get to it. We got something special tonight. Months of speculation. Nancy Pelosi, number 3 to the she has landed. Let me pop this up really quick. So we are looking at, this is Nancy Pelosi. We are definitely a military plane getting down, wearing, this is actually important. You guys should put it away. This is Pink Pelosi here. She is, wearing pink. This is, there's all sorts of symbolism and stuff. The gist of it is that this is the color blossom. That kind of stuff is really boring. The Douglas fir is the state Oregon. Really not the one people, but that is it. There's a whole world of archaism that old literature of chrysanthemum kind of stuff. It is definitely not all that these days, but it's fun to actually stuff coming out. We have to the thing out of the world right now, and if maybe is going to wear bright pink while getting off a plane the night middle of Asia, this is something to focus on, because what we are seeing now is a lot of saber rattling. So there was a lot of saber rattling for this visit. Let me catch you up really quick. A lot of senators have been thinking about going to Taiwan for a while. There was a group that were going to go, and then Nancy Pelosi was going to go. She got sick. All this stuff happened. There's been a drama about her going to Taiwan for months now, and it's been building up, and people were, would she go? Chinese started to really let their about this, and everyone was wondering. This is big news. Is basic Taiwan crisis. Them. I got a history about strategic text. This island. Why so much? Really about pride and else. It's really gonna matter unfold. So finally, I'll end with some final thoughts about change and how things have changed since the Taiwan crisis. How the United States, the relationship, the world, overall geopolitics, everything has changed. We're talking about today. And people who don't, I'm a development consultant and creator, and I talk a lot about how it works or doesn't work. And I help people understand the world is definitely breaking apart, all going back to the way it was before. And that's thing everyone's got to realize. We aren't going into something, although we are. We're going into a world like the world before, like the 1880s to the 1900s type era. The era of the oldest, right, great game, the whites sort of stuff. And in I talk about these TikToks. You can get on what's going on. Obviously, coming out that's writing I'm working. There's more. It's really cool. There's all sorts of stuff. I know what is for people who want how to navigate businesses for their personal and even for their individual pursuits. And it's cool and important because living in history. Think about it. A new land war has broken out Europe. And like we're seeing conflict of that sort of breakout. These are conflicted basically for 70 years. Period. The U.S. said different conflicts could be paused, and a world of peace and opportunity could be brought farther than it had ever been across the globe. That's what we're looking at, and that's what we're looking at breaking down too. That's the problem here. So let's get right into it. First things first, what on earth is going on with just, what's going to happen, right? What is going to happen? This is the way. So for anyone who just wants to skip everything else, let me give you this. What is going to happen? Well, first, the conflict in Taiwan and all the activity going, the fact that we have now a back and forth, and we're going to see, really, this is a live event. New drills being planned by China. There's a forces in the regions across from Taiwan on the southern coast of China. This is a huge, I like to give a lot of context because I think that context helps us see how we got to where we are, to know where we're going. And that's important. Right up quick, we got to lay it down. And one thing that's really important to know is that there are huge political battles going on behind the scenes of this whole crisis. The real ones we'll focus on for the States, then a little bit within China. China's murkier, but it's still pretty clear. So the United States, you have a battle between the right, political right, the political left in the United States. This is about foreign policy. This is about domestic. This is about basically everything. This is about what the United States is going to look like. This is about what the composition of the right and the left are looking like, because these parties are evolving before our eyes. This is another moment where when I say we're living in history, that is what we are doing. There is going to be something called probably the Democratic Party in 2030, but it's going to be completely different almost from what we have today. And probably the same thing Republican Party, because they're evolving under the surface. So there's huge playing out as everyone tries to shape where things are going. This is one of the key things to understand about U.S. domestic politics right now, which is really important to understand because U.S. domestic politics affects everything in the world. China being the case in point, because you have a battle right now between the moderate left, which has a lot of foreign policy people and experience, and the progressive left, which is interested more in U.S. domestic policies, as well as really broad reconstructions of things like aggression, fighting climate change, buy-in from everyone on the planet. That is a battle within the Democratic Party, within the left, speaking under Democratic tent. Although everybody's pretty much leaving both the parties in a lot of ways, so it doesn't matter, but that's the gist of it. And then, even more important, you have this conflict between the right and the left over China. This has been going on for a long time. There were planes that were down, and there's been the U.S. and China for an extremely long period of time. Let me show you something that'll make this clear. Look at this, guys. This here. Look who we have here. Why, if it isn't the lady herself, right? That is Nancy Pelosi. In 1991, she is in China, and she is unfurling a banner describing, she supports what happened in 1989 in Tiananmen Square. She wants to support democracy in China, etc. This was a bold move, and Nancy Pelosi actually has a history against the party, because during the administration, portrayed as a stooge for the CCP. Everyone is portrayed as a stooge of the CCP these days, but gist of it is a constituency that is one of America's four very strong positions on these issues, because you can't not have a stand thing. And in particular, as you can imagine, liberal Chinese people in San Francisco have a strong opinion about what it should and shouldn't be doing, have memories. This matters, so you see her doing stuff like that. And it was important. People don't remember, pull up an image of it, but Tiananmen Square is really an important event. So do a quick digression here, because I think you guys will really appreciate this. Everyone forgets Tiananmen Square. This was really a big, and Tiananmen Square is also a very important place. But the gist of it is that late 1970s, you had the liberalization of China, right? The opening up of China after the death of Mao, more or less rise of / coup d'etat of, here it is, coup d'etat of Deng Xiaoping. And that's a picture of Tiananmen Square with the mass of primarily student protesters in the famous Ming Dynasty, not Ming Dynasty, but basically the whole administrative complex in Beijing, all that and things around it, or like 1950s Chinese Soviet style, but massive square. It's massive, sort of like Lenin style. And in the square, it's so big. When you get out, like you pop, like me, for example, out of the subway, get into Tiananmen Square, it hurts how big it is. It's one of those things where it's very Soviet. It's really the scale of it. It's meant to show the heft, the grandeur of state in China. And so here, you have pictures of it just basically filled with students. And actually, the university that I spent a lot of time at in was heavily this protest. A huge part of this. But what happened here, it was a movement for democracy in the late 1980s. It was about 10 years after China had begun opening up. It had its Maoist era, from its Cultural Revolution, from all of this stuff that was no good. And is that they were all in so basically the Soviet Union was breaking apart, the Warsaw Pact was breaking apart, and there were so-called color revolutions. Eastern Europe were breaking down. And in a sense, this was an attempt for a similar thing to happen in China. This is a in China. This was the color revolution, take out the CCP. Now, it doesn't work in China. In all of China as a unified. Sometimes look at my other videos. You've got to look at some of the shorter stuff I've done. Understand that democracy isn't going to happen in China. Same way democracy isn't going to happen in Russia. Doesn't matter if you get rid of Putin. Doesn't matter if you get rid of Xi Jinping. That is just the way it is. Until we have serious changes in technology, production, structure, relations, all the things that flow out of the natural geography of these regions. In time, we don't get. If you're an American and you're in Congress, you support it. That is part of what we do. So we support it all over the world. These are often battling about who supports it more, who does stuff like that, etc. And so this was a major move. This was 2 years. And it was important. Use Beijing as a way to push his own and try to get himself elected. And there's this, the American left was pushing hard on China. So I'm trying to show this to show that this whole story with China, it feels new, it feels big, but it's been going on for a long time. And part of what happened is the United States got very distracted by the wars in the Middle East when it was gallivanting around the Middle East in the 2000s and early part of the 2010s. But China had been on the radar for a long time. Things could have been very, if, let's say, Herbert Walker Bush had stayed in government. If he had stayed, he won instead of Bill Clinton. He was old military type guy, very different sort of vision for what happened. Could have changed things. It didn't happen. Many things changed. But the gist is that Nancy Pelosi, it meant a lot for her politics. Her domestic politics were really, they were common, right? They were the politics of, not some random woman. It was the politics of right and left all across the states, and it's been that way for a really long time. So I'm just going to throw up another couple images of the Tiananmen Square event here. Nope. Ooh, this is going to be a big one. Get ready. Okay, so it's going to go all the way across. We'll make it a bit smaller here. Let's make that a bit smaller. Okay, so, right. So, you go look on articles online about various things in the Tiananmen Square. It's going to talk about how Beijing was so, brutal, tyrannical, crushed democracy in its country, et cetera. It's true. But the problem behind it is that it doesn't acknowledge that democracy isn't possible everywhere currently, right? Like creating democracy in so many places around the world. And China is almost, right? People were expecting the nation of China economically to lead of China politically. That did not happen, right? And China cracked down on things, and we're actually seeing a similar crackdown now. There's no real change. More than anything, there's a strong continuity between what happens in China today and what happens in ancient China from a long time ago and what happened back in the Maoist era and basically throughout Chinese history, because China is China. The same way Russia is Russia. Tough for Americans. We're not that interested in the rest of the world. History's long, doesn't involve us most of the time, so we're not as interested in it. But these countries have been who they are for a really long time. And now's the time to understand who they are, because here and the world is back to being a place where your country. So that's where we're going to go, right? We're talking about the moderate left, the progressive left, and the battle in the left in the United States over China, which was brought back in American consciousness after these wars in the Middle East are drawing down. The Obama years are ending. He made it a point of pride to sort of end these wars, particularly the one didn't quite get there with Afghanistan. But Trump arrives in the 2016 election. China becomes a huge lightning rod for a lot of things, and it just explodes. It explodes on the American scene. All the pent-up anger at the Chinese development story into the American not quite so much development story blew up. We've been dealing with that for a long time now. It happened regardless, but it really got inflamed. So the key thing we have to know now is, are we going to see some good old-fashioned conflict, right? I mean, this is the primary worry that everybody has. Excuse me. Primary worry is, are we going to see, basically, are we going to see all across China and all across the Middle East, actually, let's show this now, war. I'll just say it. Yeah, are we going to see war, right? We now know that war is back. This is this constant problem I'm having with the lighting. There it is. All right, so war, are we going to see it? That's what everyone cares about. And truly, I put probabilities on these things when I'm doing broadcasts. I speak much more in absolutes because it's actually what we want. We want the sense of confidence. I'm trying to provide the confidence that my my long years of investment in this area have provided me. I'm trying to provide that same confidence because we lack so much of an understanding about what's going on. We're all so confused. And China in particular is so big, so large, that it makes it even more difficult. So the gist of it are most likely not going to see a conflict in East Asia right now. That is the long and short of it. We're going to see a lot of other things. We're going to see a lot of provocations. China likes to do many things, including, well, it likes to do all sorts of things, but we'll get to that in a sec. The point here is that why does Taiwan still exist, right? And this is a key question I'm going to ask over the course of this broadcast. Why does it exist? And there is one primary reason why. And for Taiwan to not exist, China has to overcome that reason why China exists. So why does China exist? Let me give it to you now. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. So, everybody who saw an earlier broadcast might remember a similar. I don't know if I actually put this one up. This is newer. I'll actually make it fully. Let's make it big here. And yeah, so this is a important picture here. What you see in front of you is the rim of the Pacific exercise from this year. Now this is an armada is what this is called, if you want the technical term, right? This is a massive group of battleships that are various battleships, right? Battleship is kind of like an older word. We have carriers and many other sorts of surface combatant ships. But the point here is this is a group of American ships along with American allies. And this is one of the largest, this is basically the largest naval exercise that happens yearly or semi-annually. Not even. Yearly or bi-yearly, I can't remember. These exercises are important because they show off, they train a lot of skills within the military, within the Navy, within the cooperative capabilities of various navies with the United States. But the U.S. Navy is the reason that Taiwan exists, the single reason that Taiwan exists. And the U.S. Navy is still around. So this is the key story. And China isn't going to do something crazy as long as the U.S. Navy exists and is clearly involved in what's going on. So the thumbnail for this is actually an image of a carrier, I believe it's the Ronald Reagan, which is actually part of a carrier battle group that is operating outside of the shout here. Carrier battle group that's operating outside the relatively nearby to Taiwan. So see if I can find this for you guys. But this is the key to American international expeditionary force projection. It's a carrier battle group, and these typically are part of the story. And this is why Taiwan isn't part of China. And we're going to go through all of this right now because the major story that we're seeing right now, which is this fourth Taiwan crisis, I'm going to get through the other three in a sec. This is really important. This lets us understand what is really going on with China, the biggest myth at the heart of modern China, which has done more to confuse people about what this country really is than anything else. We're going to go through all this. And the key thing to start, if you don't have anything else going on, just remember, the U.S. still exists. And I'll just go on a quick limb here. The Chinese plan for actually defeat or conquer Taiwan, extremely hard to do. But the gist of what they wanted to do was to basically do a surprise attack, take the island, or at least surround the island, cut it off, move before forces could get involved, and then basically was in a position where the U.S. would then have to go break a Chinese encirclement of the island. That's what happened. Right? That was the way they wanted. It involves surprise. That involves keeping the U.S. out before the conflict begins, and then not allowing the U.S. to get involved. This is very different. This is the opposite sort of situation where it would be, okay, the U.S. is involved, and now we are going to try and go full bore here when the U.S. has full knowledge of what's going on. That's a kind of crazy thing to do. And yeah, I always want to give you guys so much history because I think it's so valuable, but you could just go right into it. So I'm going to do a little bit more, and then I will get to this history because it's really important. You don't find this kind of depth of history other places, so it's worthwhile. But another key thing here is that the United States, China has many plans for what to do with Taiwan, and a lot of them involve contingencies such as Taiwan declaring independence, right? That's a very different situation. And so what the U.S. has done for over 50 years is do a very, very balancing act where it supports Taiwan, but it doesn't support it enough Taiwan to just say, all right, we're independent, and then basically forcing the U.S. to defend it for it, right? The U.S. doesn't want to force to do that, but doesn't want to allow China to think it can do so. So it's always this gray middle ground, which we'll get into, which you hear all the time. That's why this whole thing about China and Taiwan is so gray and murky, because the politics of it, the legality of it is one thing, but the geostrategic very different. So that's what we're going to get into now. First thing, we're going to get into the history section. Next time I do a video, I'm actually going to throw up cool title transitions for everybody, so you guys know what the different scenes and moments of the live stream are. It's a lot more fun, a lot more dynamic that way. But right now, this studio is still totally bare. I have to put up with that and put up with the very otherwise low production value elements that we have going here. But the place we're going to start is Taiwan and China. China says it is part of China. Fair enough. You can say that. People can say whatever they want. But what's the deep history here? Well, roughly speaking, China's been around for 3,500 years. It's old. It's not as old as it says it is. 5,000, total lie. 100, true. And a little more than 3,500, but 3,500 roughly. So 3,500 years. How long has Taiwan of those 3,500 years of Chinese history? Easy question, right? Simple question. Well, not if you're Chinese or you're on mainland China, more like, not necessarily Chinese. Typically on this show, on any broadcast, when I talk about Chinese, I mean people living in mainland China under the political authority of the Chinese Communist Party, just to be clear. But China says all sorts of things. But how long has Taiwan been a part of China? 3 years. Yep. 10% of the time. 90% of Chinese history, it has been not even politically a part of China. And to be honest, of that 10%, Taiwan is barely of China. It's barely been occupied and held by Chinese people. So let's get into this. Well, let's get into this now. So key here is that Taiwan, a place, let's pull up actually. Let's pull this down and let's go. Yeah, here we go. Let's give you guys a fun switch here. Boom. All right. So I am actually using Apple Maps on the desktop. I'm actually very excited about this. You're gonna see me and really enjoy myself here. I'm gonna pull this over. Also, anybody, please tell me in the comments how the noise is in the background. There's some audio processing going on that should be improving things, but it also messed up some of the audio in the beginning. So I want to see if it's working now. Anyway, I got distracted because I'm talking. Here, Taiwan, right? So let's zoom out for you guys first. So people who are new to this channel, geography, everything, politics, economics, war, military strategy, social development, everything on this channel is viewed primarily, or at least fundamentally, from a view that geography comes first. Geography and then demography later for the industrial era. But here we are, East Asia. First, I want to get quick, also that's me, Los Angeles, tell you any more about where I am. Okay, so first, the scale, the distances here. You got to realize that the United States is thousands of miles away from China, and Taiwan is very, very close by, right? People got to realize this just because trying to involve itself in things away, the home field advantage definitely on China's side, very important. Taiwan, we're going to go straight into it. The Taiwanese geography is a main natural spine of mountains, really big mountains. Look, you got some snow. They cover roughly speaking, the whole eastern part of the island and most of the center of it. And then there's just sort of a strip along the western edge where people live, right? Where there's population centers. There's a couple exceptions, exception here, but largely speaking, a couple ports. But that's the gist of it. It all faces China. The challenge in China's history, and the reason Taiwan was not part of China for so long, for basically all of China's history. Let's be real. The only Chinese dynasty that ever had control of Taiwan was the final Chinese dynasty, the Qing dynasty, the only one. And really, it was really minor for a lot of its history. But the reason why, one, Taiwan was actually inhabited by a group of indigenous who were headhunters. So the coming of age ritual for young male native Taiwanese people was to go find anybody who happened to, stroll up on the beach, fall out of a boat, crawl on a raft, and make it to the shoreline, gasping, panting, thankful to finally be back on, dry land. They would do that, and they would cut off their heads and bring it back to their elders as proof of their manhood. Right. So that does not make it very hospitable to a lot of Chinese history, to a lot of the settlement early on in Chinese history. More importantly, Taiwan is well with mainland China. This is stuff other depth video. We talk deeply about the structural dynamics that made China the way it is, made different parts of China the way it is. But roughly speaking here, this is the beautiful, amazing Yangtze River Valley, lower Yangtze here, central, upper, etc. Upper, way big upper here. This is all mostly mountainous. Basically, all you have on the coast of southern China is a bunch of isolated port cities, like a dozen of them, and they all just string along the coast here, and they're part of a, roughly speaking, a maritime commercial economy that developed again and again throughout history, integrating with broader trading networks, stuff like that. The island of Taiwan, really not a part of Chinese history at all. It was actually before it became Chinese, it was actually European. Crazy as that sounds, right? This is not a narrative you're going to hear anywhere where people are talking about China, but that is 100% true. Let me pull up an image for you guys. So the first people to go to Taiwan were the Portuguese. They really made it all around the world. It's really quite impressive, everything they were able to do. They were really they were the great empire before the Dutch, before the British. Very cool. I mean, not very cool. I mean, it depends. Very historical, because there's they played a very important role in mapping the world in a lot of ways, right? And first beginning to unite different parts of the world into a unified whole here. So I'm going to grab this image for you guys, pull it in here. Let's see. Can I put it just right on top here? That'd be nice. Okay, cool. Oh, really cool. So yeah, so check this out. Here you have Taiwan. You look at it in the middle. This is another picture of Taiwan, and this picture is basically of, wow, I have to go in there. Is it in English? Yeah, anyway, gist of it, there's Chinese. Ooh, it's a different language. And then on the bottom, that should be Portuguese. Basically, you have Portuguese on the bottom, Dutch on the bottom, and then Portuguese, Taiwan on the top. And this is what happened, right? This was during the Ming era, roughly speaking. This is when European settlers and adventurers, explorers, etc., moved around the world, and they found their way to Taiwan. And here's a better one, although it's a little small. I can really just pop them up on here. So this is really cool. So here's a better one. You have the Dutch on the bottom. You have the Spanish at the top. And yeah, the Spanish, of course, get booted. Eventually, they got booted from, roughly speaking, everywhere in the world. Their empire just did not cut it. But this is really correct, right? So you had the Dutch, then you had the Spanish, and then you had the Qing. Although we're getting into a different part of history, but the gist of it is that there was Portuguese. There were other foreign groups with outposts, not like total colonization here, because again, headhunters and all that, but they really had a presence in Taiwan for a long time. And this is important because and also, if anyone ever tells you that Taiwan was part of China, et cetera, where's the place to look? Well, the place to look is the Sung Dynasty. Sung Dynasty, roughly 1,000 years ago. And system audio. Oh, I hope there's not any feedback here. Let me do a quick quick thing here to make sure that you guys aren't getting any bad feedback. Well, I'll have to fix this next time. I hope there's no bad feedback, but I'm going to shut off a lot of sound effects and stuff for today because I think they might be dubious. But it's just me today. It's just going to be just oh no, have I not been? Oh wow, you guys, I really am back to live mode here. Revert changes. Huh. Well, anyway, I hope that was cool. I'm still learning a lot of this software. It's very cool. It allows me to show you guys so many things at once, but there's almost too many options, a lot of things to get a handle on at once. But I'm going to go back to the map now. Gist of it, I was showing you the location of Taiwan. I explained it. I didn't get too deep into the geography and stuff. It's too much. Gist of it, though, is the political is here. Big, massive, flat piece of land up there. Taiwan is waiting. Taiwan is almost like the ringleader in a lot of ways. A separatist South. This is actually how I refer to southern China as the separatist South. And this here is the Pearl. This is the seat of imperial and then later communist imperial control of southern China. It's been this way for over 2,000 years. As far back as the Qin dynasty, this has been the seat of authority of the north in China. Basically take some rivers and canals up here to the Yangtze through the access to northern, and that allows a little artery connection between this region in the south and everything else. Why did China want this? Well, this part of China historically had many, well, obviously it was connected to all sorts of trade routes, it was connected to stuff like that. It had pearls, all sorts of odd luxuries, kind of that fit for a tropical region, a tropical coastal region, and it allowed it to participate in many, many different trade networks, right? This, trying to do things out of the Yangtze River Delta, this is an extremely long journey for older time in history, right? You don't have crazy ships. This was really key. And so China's always tried to maintain really strong control over southern China. It's always done it through here. And in many ways, Taiwan is this ringleader of a South that can look for a different future. Now, I am not trying to say that southern China should go do its own thing. Millions of people would die, probably. They'd all starve. I'm trying to this is a real talk show. We're really beyond this world of, everyone should be free. Again, just like this is Xinjiang. This is the northwestern Muslim part of China. This region, if it was left to its own devices, historically, no thriving civilization has ever lived here. You can go talk about many nomadic cultures and stuff, but it's a very different thing. The population growth, the scale here, this would be immediately hit by mass deprivation. Similar thing with Tibet. Again, they had a great monastic ascetic culture, all that sort of thing. But we're living in a world where to maintain the standard of living that a lot of places have developed, oppression, terrible as it is, genocide in Xinjiang, terrible as it is, although I probably shouldn't be using these words because of YouTube's algorithm. People are here early on in this channel's development. You got to enjoy the full story. This isn't going to get better, right? Even the way to a place like this, landlocked central, one of the worst places for all sorts of development. It is so far from anywhere. And once the Silk Road trade routes, which went through this region, died down, again, part of the movement of the Portuguese, from the west coast of Africa, using new ships with new technologies, better navigation, better ship technology, right? Better construction materials, all that. They went around the Cape, went here, around India. They made it here. This formed the world, and this made this made sense, part of a unifying link through the world, something of the past, right? No longer was that the case at all. No longer was that the case at all. That's also, it hit Istanbul, made that, or former Constantinople, whatever, made that less of the imperial center that it was. And that is part of this. What I've been doing, everybody, but where and what Taiwan is. I talked about how the United States pushed itself between the Chinese and another part of this East Asian, just off the side of the East Asian mainland that China for the last 350 years is considered part of China. And then I went through how it's always been a bit of a problem. It's actually more of a place where you would go to mess with the political China rather than to support them. Kind of like it's in Taiwan, very similar. This here, no, that is not. Over here is Hong Kong, and it was all a place just outside of the Pearl River Delta to let you be there and put yourself at the mouth of one of the 3 great coastal trading zones. One of the 2 great coastal trading zones and 3 great population economic zones in coastal China that allowed you to be there and control imports and outputs and put your thumb on the scale of different issues and make sure that your opinion was valued and kind of forcing yourself into all sorts of transactions. I mean, this is the story of how the British Empire, that's how the sausage was made in the British Empire, roughly speaking. They were very good at choosing strategic locations with great harbors, deep water, insulation, and access to really profitable trade arteries, custom zones, all of that. This is the true center of the Pearl River Delta. It's a city called Guangzhou. I wish I could make my, there it is. Oh, there you go, people. So this is Guangzhou, and down here, this is Shenzhen, which grew next to Hong Kong as a special economic zone way back in the day. But point being, Hong Kong is right there off the side of the mouth of this Pearl River Delta, site of Chinese political authority and control in southern China. And then you have big thing for Taiwan. Ooh, did I just zoom out into the Pacific? You have same thing for Taiwan, for all China, right? It is that thing on the southern China that can disrupt everything. Actually, what happens, and now we're getting back to the story. I'm talking about the 4th Taiwan crisis. But here's the thing. This whole saga between the island of Taiwan and the state on mainland China, this is the 2nd time in Chinese history this has happened. This is actually the crazy thing. I'm going to go back to me really quick. You guys can see me gesticulating vigorously here. And get rid of this. This, let me get rid of that too. Right, so hopefully this comes back with the light, with the webcam here. This is the 2nd time that there has been a major American always start war. Well, we'll see. But this is the 2nd time there has been a major conflict between Taiwan and mainland China. And it's the same story, where a faction that lost a civil war in China flees to Taiwan. It gets pushed out of northern China, forced to flee to the south, or from the Yangtze River Delta south, and it has to flee. It flees. Where does it flee to? It flees to Taiwan. This is actually how Taiwan entered Chinese history. It entered history the same way you see it functioning in history today. This is the same story. So let me tell it a little, very quickly. Let's go back to full map of the world. Well, just now zoomed in, and back in the middle of the 17th century, the Ming Dynasty was totally collapsing, and it was brutal. It was violent. It was among the most violent things in the world. And then, at the time, and actually world history, the collapse of a Chinese state you can find anywhere, and basically a new non-Han Chinese state appeared in northeast China, modern or formerly known as Manchuria. Up here, it's actually very big. It's more like very big. And that group went conquered northern China, conquered over here, kept going down. One. And again, this is a very powerful group. There was guns, there was horses, all this stuff, and they crushed the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty has to collaborate with a lot of very powerful merchant families and merchant trading empires, basically, that basically functionally ruled a lot of southern China. So you can say what you want about this dynasty ruling or that in China. Oftentimes what rules a lot of southern China is basically merchant clans. And if you look, for people who aren't familiar with this, if you look at the structure of shipping magnates or even the real estate developers there, or the very dense networks, all these families, Southeast Asia, continuation of a very old pattern that these entrepreneurial, innovative merchant all across the separatist Chinese southern coast. And that is where it begins, right? So the Ming Dynasty flees 1640s, 50s, collaborates with a bunch of pirate merchants in the south, and they go and they flee to Taiwan. This is when Taiwan is history. middle of the 17th century, basically they go crush the indigenous people there. I think the Spanish are still there. I can't remember at this point, but they go there, they crush everyone there, and they rule it for 30 years. They rule it for 30 years-ish, and mainland China, brand new Qing dynasty, the final Qing dynasty, it decides we can't have this. It builds up a major fleet and eventually conquers Taiwan, right? The challenge is it is not the reason to compete with China mentally, right? And everybody knows this. You go look at a map of China versus Taiwan, you look at all the numbers, you look at the population, you look at the land, you look at the resource, you look at everything. Obviously, these two can't compete. And fundamentally for Taiwan, let me see if I can give you guys, is it this? Nope, I just took a picture unnecessarily. Did I just take a picture? Nah. Anyway, that's not helpful. Let me see what it is. Let's see if we can give this. Oh, it's like this. Ooh, 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 ooh. Wait. Get ready, guys. Boom. We're going 3D here. The gist is that fine, right? Spoke about this earlier. And then you actually have basically push out in many places all the way to the Chinese coast. And another episode I'll get into this, but here in the major China, but I mean around Taiwan. First, you don't see a lot of rivers on Taiwan. It is so mountainous, so you don't get a lot of rivers that kind of pull out into the sea to give you large plains where you can start really massing a population, consolidating resources, differing your labor, and really expanding beyond what Taiwan existed as for most of its history, right? It never, not only China of anything. This story, it actually has a very interesting history in terms of ancient history and the movement of peoples into Southeast Asia way before, like tens of thousands of years ago. That's super interesting. The language families of early Formosan. This is really dorky for a lot of people. If people are interested in that, you should definitely tell me, because I end up about geopolitics because I really care about, but ancient history is fast. So here you see the mountains basically pull all the way to the coast, and a lot of this coast is also mud flats. So I didn't pull it up for now, but in any potential Chinese invasion there's actually a very limited number of landing sites. And what China would have to do, it would have to do a very complex combined arms operation where it is throwing massive amounts of soldiers across China by air and by sea. So that means massive amounts of helicopters, massive amounts of ships. But the problem is there's only so many beachheads. And right, so that's a separate challenge for later. But the gist of Taiwan is that it is not powerful enough to stand China on its own. Hence, it got for decades. That was the story. When entered Chinese history, this is what I was saying earlier, that the actual story for Taiwan that we see today, where we have these crises, we have this horrible problem with the United States, China, Taiwan, everybody getting in everybody's business. Let me see if I can get this. Oh, it's back, so you guys can see my beautiful, beautiful face here again. The issue fundamentally for China is that it lost the Taiwan Strait. The reason we call all these issues the Taiwan Strait crises, the first Taiwan Strait crisis in the early 50s, second in the late, third in the 90s, now fourth in the early 20s, is because this is the fundamental block, the full challenge for China, which it does not have an answer to yet, which is why I say we're not going to have a conflict. We're not going to have a major epic conflict, it's because China just does not yet know how to bridge this gap. Taiwan has been preparing for a Chinese invasion for 70 years, and it was run as a dictatorship for a long time, into the 80s. The Taiwan basically it had so few resources when it tried to become itself. Basically what happened, the Chinese Civil War happens again in the 1940s. After World War II ends, the Chinese Civil War and the Japanese are defeated. The Civil War starts anew. Let me get rid of this. You guys. Starts, anything happens. Chiang Kai-shek, the ruler of the Kuomintang, which is the Chinese Nationalist Party, they flee to Taiwan again. They're actually recapitulating the same story, the same exact story in Chinese history. This is a new pattern. You can roughly speaking say that there's been a huge change in Chinese history about how the South and the North relate to each other in the last couple hundred years. And this is, first of all, a really contentious relationship. Northern China and Southern China are different places. Any Chinese person will tell you that they can tell right away, ethnically, visually, whether a Chinese person is from the South or from the North. These are very different. They cultivated different crops. They had different economic systems. They had very different outlooks on the world. a really key thing to know is that this part of northern China here is very, doesn't have a single viable deep water port all the way down to basically Shanghai here. Shanghai, roughly speaking, down here. There's none. There's two rough ones that made their way later on, but Dalian, Qingdao, Tianjin, all new. They had a very different economies, mercantile cities. So the outlife, the relationship to different countries, political structure, it was all very different. Northern China conquered southern China. This is the developmental story of the Chinese state. It's one of the fundamental developmental stories of the Chinese state, because there was no other option. Actually, China is such a mess, so poor, so violent, and so difficult to actually wrangle together that they needed to conquer the South and the Yangtze in particular to actually make this a viable country in any way, shape, or form. So that is this story. And when you have a modern Taiwan that is now, the nationalists have fled again. Taiwan is once more its own unified state, really, roughly speaking, about 300 years after it happened the first time, right? Yeah, it's about 300 years after. You had the same pattern repeat itself. There's so few resources on Taiwan that you actually have to mass everything. You're facing such a larger enemy. Your economic resources are so limited. Your manpower resources are so limited. This place was a dictatorship for years, and they really worked hard to find out how to combat the Chinese. So this place is, by the way, basically granite. If you want to know, a lot of this is composed of basically granite, and there are tunnels and bunkers and machine gun outposts and missile outposts and all of that everywhere, just studding the island. This is literally like Fortress Taiwan. I'll be the first to admit, the last 30 so years of history, Taiwan's been trying to get rich like everybody else. Has not been their priority. Their military has serious problems. However, if Ukraine has taught us one thing, people will fight when they are pushed to defend themselves. And now, unfortunately, the Taiwanese are psyched up for what could be happening. And they see what's happening in Europe. They're getting this sense, like everybody watching this channel, that history is now here again. It is actually moving right now, and they're not going to stand still. So it would be a real conflict. And other broadcasts will really go deep one day. I really want to make a podcast about it. You guys should check out the podcast, by the way. They're really cool. I want to make a podcast about Taiwan for so long, but I want to give this longer history and really structuring it to last forever, to be this great piece of evergreen content, to use a marketing type phrase. It really hasn't come together yet, but I can give you guys a lot of what I would put into that right here. And the big difference for Taiwan 300 years later, in the 1950s and beyond, was that the U.S. Navy, it may not have all the resources on Taiwan that it needs. Functionally speaking, Taiwan should be if it wasn't part of a U.S. global system, Taiwan would be a dirt poor piece of nothing island in the Pacific, most likely. That is how that would happen. It would not be a modern advanced economy. And the big difference that allowed this to happen, allowed this story, this Taiwanese development story to happen, is the U.S. Navy standing between China and Taiwan. So now we're going to get into the crises, right? This is new, right? When I say that Taiwan is new, I mean Taiwan was never able to exist. There was no world where a brand new Chinese state that it was just consolidating together and it finally brought together all of the manpower, in particular the manpower resources of China, would not go conquer a small island that could not defend itself, right? The Qing dynasty eventually did it. Mao and the communists were all expecting to do it, but the world had changed, right? So just to bring it back to where we were talking about earlier, to bring it back to that image that we saw, this, again, is that story, right? I actually have even better pictures. Let me grab them for you guys. I'll put myself in the corner here. In the corner there? Yeah, perfect. So this, again, is this armada, right? What do? You can't send boats. You can't send any sort of thing if you can't cross this strait. It is just a very, very different thing. You are fighting. You can't fight. I mean, navies are among the most complicated. Late in your development story, things that happen. So, oh, this is a great picture for you guys. Let me put this on. So this was the U.S., this year, but you go back to the World War II era. There was never in all of human history a crazy naval military on the scale of what the U.S. was doing in World War II. And obviously, U.S. military capacity right now is crazy, but the scale, again, the number, similarly like how you have bodies, you say, hey, we just have a problem. The ability of the U.S. back in World War II to throw equipment at a problem was pretty legendary. So you had like literally armadas, like armadas. I mean, this was a country that was basically preparing to conquer the home islands of Japan, which nobody had ever done. Genghis Khan, the Mongols failed. Nobody had ever done that. And so the buildup that you saw in the Pacific and all is absolutely crazy. Oh, we got some comments here. I'm going to just take a second here because I do appreciate everybody on this channel early on here. We got Taiwan belongs to China. It will be unified soon. Right. China, if China can do it, you just have to get past the Navy. And the way to do it, honestly, I'm happy to give China some advice here. The way to do it would be to do a sort of surprise attack, fait accompli type thing. Very hard to do. And we're going to get into it later, but the Chinese economic situation is so deteriorating. The political situation is making things more volatile, but it's tough. You actually, to do it, I mean, to actually unify Taiwan, you have to take it, right? And again, everything you see on the screen in front of you is the reason why China's never been able to do this. Do I think Pelosi made China mad enough to do something? China is really mad. So jumping ahead a bit, the big challenge for China is that after the 1990s, during the 1990s, there was another crisis. We'll get into that in a little bit. And things like you see on the screen, carrier battle groups, other USMRs sailed right through the Taiwan Strait. Point of that was a show of force, like, hey, reminding China of why Taiwan exists. That's why the U.S. Navy does that. That is 100% the reason why it does it. Just shows, right, what's the nature of the game here. The big challenge is that, first, you guys will notice, you're not going to see, most likely, a carrier battle group just run through the Taiwan Strait anymore. The military technology, the military capabilities of the Chinese, they don't allow that anymore. So current U.S. carrier battle group associated sort of amphibious, not amphibious, basically they have sort of other flat tops that are operating F-35s. This is a really powerful air wing and naval contingent that's in the region. And it's very powerful, but it's almost certain. Let me show you guys on the map here. I am not going to pull up sort of, right, everyone loves to like track everything and do all that. I'm not going to do that right now, but roughly speaking, they're operating in northeast the Philippines, so backside of Taiwan. And this is also generally the U.S. policy these days. So remember, this is Japan up here, the Ryukyu Islands here, all of this. And so what happened after, basically, I'll get into the crisis now. I'll answer some of your other comments in a little bit. But I've been saying for a while, I've been talking about these crises, right? So the U.S. Navy stood in the way of China, right? Taiwan could not be conquered like it was the last time. And that's the way it's been for 70 years. But during this period, a lot of things happened. And now, well, first, the geostrategic context again. So Taiwan is perfectly placed to ruin China's day, as you can imagine. You're right here. You can blockade, destroy, interdict, mess with everything going in and out of China. It is extraordinarily horrific for any sort of political, military, economic challenges, right? And particularly if you have any sort of conflict, Taiwan's ability to just wreck, for example, shipping that goes through the Taiwan Strait. So you have Taiwan, the Philippines was part of the U.S. alliance system, and the islands that go up here, part of the Philippines, and the islands here that are under the administration of Japan. This really, if the Taiwan Strait was, roughly speaking, no matter what's going on between Taiwan and the Philippines, you can't get anything into northern China, right? This is what we're talking about. This enables a total of everything into the Chinese heartland. So China's very aware of this, right? And so part of the reason why it is so insane and desperate to fix this Taiwan situation, yeah, there's pride, there's national pride, and there's a huge component of this where Taiwan is extraordinarily important to the Chinese self-concept, because the fundamental myth of China, if anybody listens to any of the interviews I've done, which you should check out, I go into all sorts of topics, the fundamental myth that I always say is the most helpful one to break misunderstanding of the idea that if you look deep under the surface, not even deep under the surface, you look right under the surface, you'll see many, many different Chinas. For example, Northwest China, you have Manchuria, which used to have a totally different ethnic group, had a different name. It was, Han Chinese were forbidden to enter it when the period that it entered basically Chinese history. You have Tibet, you have Southern China, you have Sichuan, you have Taiwan, you have the different Yangtze, and these places had different civilizations with them. They had different languages associated with them. In many respects, they always had it. Before the modern era, they had isolated regional economies. They weren't integrated into a larger national whole ever until the modern era. So that's all new. And one of the challenges for any Chinese, particularly whoever rules China, is to maintain this impression of political authority, centrality, unity, and also longevity and depth into the past. So the Chinese completely contort their history in order to serve a political narrative of unity and centrality and continuity throughout history. Basically, that China is old, it's unified, and it's centralized under one authority. All of China's history is really distorted to maintain this narrative. And what happens whenever a Chinese state unifies is it tries to get as many pieces of China as possible, as many pieces of actually anywhere in East Asia as possible. It's actually trying to just protect a very vulnerable core region. This one that I'm circling here, the same part in northern China, actually called the North China Plain, where roughly, 2/3 or more of the Chinese population lives in a generous conception of what exactly the North China Plain is. So this is basically the good part of China. Everything else is just trying to support this good part of China. That's the fundamental story here on the ground. And so it is helpful to understand, to look at China and see a giant map of one large, red, imposing, unified country. Excuse me there, gotta get some water. What we're actually looking at, really, really honestly, is something more like the Soviet Union, where you look at, everyone thought the Soviet Union was so massive, it was so insanely large, it was so powerful, so big, and it was all true. But you look at the component pieces of it, and it was actually designed to prevent unity, like in more entities within the Soviet Union. Right, it is very, very different. So, you have the Volga River. We go through all of Western Eurasia a different time. I just want to bring this up because, for example, specifically let me make this big for you guys. There it is. Parts of Central Asia and the Caucasus, he crafted them into little Soviet states that purposely split all the different ethnic groups and ensured conflict for generations between the different pieces. And in a similar way, China has things. Oops, I'm just sending this around. Oops, you guys are going to get some lag here. I'm launching all across the world. We're back. Let's give it a second for everybody up here. We're back. So China actually did something similar. The best example, I want to labels for everybody. I know it's kind of hard. It's great if you guys take the course I'm coming up with and a lot of the other materials to learn to read the maps on their own, to see the different parts of the world, to see how they layer themselves throughout history, to see how this whole planet and this, our species built up different parts of the world into different things. It's very useful. Unfortunately, these labels just kind of get everywhere. Take them off. But I'll show you guys here. I have to take them off again. It's actually so I can't take it. Can't take it, guys. Getting rid of it. I'm getting rid of the labels. You don't need them. This here is a region of China called Sichuan. Sichuan food, by the way, if you guys know the spicy Chinese food, this is it's one of those examples of a little element of a foreign culture that seems small and kind of quirky or whatever, but is actually important, right? So of all the places in China that could have been picked as something that would linger on in American cultural consciousness, Sichuan is a very good one. This is basically this is the Upper Yangtze. It's a flat, roughly flat, compared to extraordinarily flat bowl. Used to have a big lake there, drained out, and here you have a couple of ridges. It starts to get some geological ridge action there, and then you have basically a giant city. This is actually the most part of China geographic perspective. There's a giant of China. Two most important parts of non-coastal China, bar none. And there's another region here. So basically what China did relatively recently in the last couple of decades is it turned this eastern part of Sichuan into a federally administrated municipality. Basically, it's like a city on the scale of like DC, right? We're a city that has its own sort of whole government. It's a city that functionally is administered like a province. It's as if LA or New York was equal to California or Delaware. Kind of an interesting thing. I think a lot of people actually think cities are so important as engines of human growth that they should have some status like that. There's interesting questions whether the urban areas in a place like the United States should have more authority. Should they be wedded to the regions around them and the politics? That's for a different discussion. And actually, in another broadcast, I'm going to talk based on a comment I got in one of my other broadcasts, where someone was just talking about building cities on Mars versus why don't we build new cities on the Earth? And the big reason, spoiler, not a spoiler. There's so much in that broadcast. You guys are gonna. The spoiler. This is the world we have, right? And most of the places you can build big cities and make it work, it's already been done. So we're gonna get into stuff there. But the point for this is that this eastern part of China. Let me actually head to it. Nowhere. Well, I'll just put it back for a sec. Yeah. So eastern China, eastern Sichuan here. I believe it. So, yeah, you guys are gonna so you get a bit of a dive into we are part of the world we live in now, where we don't live in a world where the whole world is flat. Everything can go everywhere. Every little ridge, every river, every mountain, every plain, all of it matters. All of it matters, right? This globalized world is ending, and we're going to see anew what the real world looks like. And so the best place to see this is in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, where now every city, every river crossing, every mountain, every plain, all of it matters, because we now have the perspective of old military commanders, where you have to know precisely who has the high ground, where do we have cover, where are we exposed, where can we move resources efficiently, where are we going to get bogged down, where are we going to get bottlenecked, where can we be ambushed, all of that matters. So we're back here. This is some deep stuff. And also this region of China, this is, it's one of the most important parts of China, most fascinating regions. It's ridiculously interesting. But what happened actually, just bring it out real quick, not the U.S. conquered, when World War II, and it suddenly ends all around China, owned by the United States. Actually, I'll get back to Sichuan for you guys, but I'm going to talk about the first Chinese, the crisis here, because this is one of my really great topics. You guys could really get a lot of content here. The stories here is that, after World War II, the United States had all basically allied or taken over, occupied, in the case of Japan, all the islands on the coast of China. And that's really difficult. If you're China and you're trying to get resources and goods to come in, very challenging when all of the islands are owned by an enemy, someone that you don't work with. And what Taiwan is specifically is this like big aircraft carrier type thing right off the coast of China's southern coast. It's a great place for pirates, smugglers, and foreigners to congregate. That's what's happened historically. You had the Portuguese, you had the Dutch, not the Portuguese, they're kind of just exploring it. Actually, the word Formosa is I believe a Portuguese word for beautiful. But the great thing about Taiwan, for anyone who's not mainland China's perspective, is that it's just a great place to stick yourself in the middle of things, right? You can sit yourself right alongside all major trade flows that are going through China, right? The ones that are coming up from the South China Sea and are taking the shortest into, right? So you go across the Malacca Straits, you go through here, you go up through the middle, Taiwan, and you make here in the Great Yangtze River. That's the story. You don't really want to go around if you can avoid it. Not as pleasant, it's not as, it's also just not as, so this is a great place to predict all sorts of things. That's what's happened. And what it really means is that real powers based in Taiwan can shut down southern China and limit access in northern China. This is what I talked about earlier. So the threat from Taiwan isn't the threat that Taiwan is really independent. It is the threat that Taiwan is part of something else, part of another great powers network or system, in which case it is a great threat to China. The first country, the old Europeans, was Japan. Japan, the first thing it took over was Taiwan. And Taiwan's history, there's a strong connection between Taiwan and Japan. you go on the ground in Taiwan, you'll hear the honest truth about this. There's a lot of connections there. And this was exactly what happened. This was the toehold for a country that later conquered everything worth. Of course, Sichuan, to bring it back, is this internal mountain fortress in the center of China. Once the U.S. had taken all these islands, once Japan had taken all the North China Plain, all these southern island, all these southern port cities, Manchuria, South Korea, all of Korea, Taiwan. Once it had all of it, the gist of it is that the nationalists fled into this region, Sichuan here, and then the communists fled into this part of the Middle Yangtze. This is just one. These are the two important parts of central China, and the Sichuan thing is way more interesting than the other one. And in Sichuan, basically, this place became this fortress. The whole story of the people, the Americans supplying China, right? You forget what happened. The Americans resupplying China over into Sichuan. So this here to the west of Sichuan, this is actually part of where Tibet province and where Tibet as a geographic thing and Sichuan is a more geographic thing. Where it ends is it's a bit murky or whatever, but these are like the flow, the valleys of these are gnarly valleys and great rivers that go down and like Mekong. All this kind of comes through this region. You can actually see it's almost like a bit of like a funnel between the plateau here and the basin, the Sichuan basin here. Kind of just these valleys, just in the ridges pull down in between it. What happened is that when Mao started to have a conflict with the United States, started to mass it was either, I want to say third, I'm confusing with the recent military strategy of the United States, but basically there was something called the third line, third something, where basically they thought the U.S. would nuke or conquer or burn or destroy everything accessible from coastal China. So they turned Sichuan into this military fortress. And there's actually a lot of major Chinese military industrial defense contractors that are still based in Sichuan and that got their start in a lot of ways, or a lot of their initial capacity came from this early development process to build a part of central China up to withstand a potential U.S. assault in the same way that China during World War II under the nationalists was forced into Sichuan to have a bastion, a sort of a final redoubt where it could try and avoid the Japanese onslaught. So China saw what happened with Japan during World War II, and it wanted to make sure it prepared for a real conflict with the United States by already moving these resources into Sichuan just in case. So that's that story. And let's see. So and what I was saying was that Taiwan, now part of this whole thing, you can blockade everything, you shut everything down in China. It's horrific, right? Really bad. And actually, early Taiwan, so early Kuomintang, 1950s, I think it might have been the late 40s. Well, not the late 40s because the revolution was 1949, but early 50s, there was even a policy, it's called the Guanbi policy, where basically Taiwan was blockading China. Right? That was just the start. It was basically the China blockade policy. That didn't last, obviously, but in the 1950s is when Taiwan became an issue. Mao knew all of this. He knew Chinese history. He knew the different regions of China. He knew things were not unified at all. His whole experience of China had been a war-torn country his entire life. And he looked at Chinese history, he saw that was actually the norm. Within and between Chinese empires, the norm is warlordism, factionalism, fragmentation, chaos, and violence. Unfortunately, this is the deep truth of Chinese history, and we're going to go in other broadcasts into why. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments, because there's so much to go through and so much to say, and there's so many current events that, based on what the community, what everybody tells me, that's where I'm going to start pushing for things. Because the only way to get, ideally, I'm creating a course for all of you where you can learn all of this in one comprehensive place. But often we don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we don't have all this, where learning a huge chunk of it in the context of something you're interested in, and it's also a current event, is a great way to do it. It's also a great way to just get your foot in and to start being able to, like we're doing here, just have the map in front of you, have the world in front of you, and start having it speak to you in a really important way. So definitely tell me if you're interested in that stuff or any of the stuff that I'm talking about. Mention it in the comments, mention it wherever. It's very helpful to get you guys more of the content you're really excited about. So I got distracted there, but we had the blockade policy. We had all of that. I was saying that Mao knew all this. He knew all about Chinese history and the truth of it, that it's difficult. And what he needed to do is use the industrial and later the digital tool. Well, he didn't really do it, but China needed to use fundamentally the tools of modern science and technology, industrialization basically, to try and bring all these pieces of China together. That is the fundamental project of modern China. Whether it was communist, it wouldn't have mattered if it was Kuomintang or Chinese or communist. This was the fundamental project that they had to get done. Otherwise, Chinese history was going to repeat itself sooner rather than later. So that's the great focus. And so when the United States basically enabled or protected his bitter rival, Chiang Kai-shek, on Taiwan, you got to remember, this is a personal rivalry here. These guys were bitter enemies for like over 10 years. 15, geez, I don't even know. They're actually, when they started hating each other, that's a tough one. But anyway, your bitter rival was now protected, ensconced and protected on this island. And so in the early 50s, basically Mao started to just rattle the saber. He wanted to incite a conflict. He wanted to see if the U.S. really cared, right? Because this had never happened in Chinese history. There'd never been some distant foreign power, massively powerful maritime state that just prevented China from dealing with Taiwan. And again, Taiwan was never a part of China's history, but when a failed or former political leader of China flees to Taiwan, it really becomes an issue. So just for people to understand the personal animus that Mao had against Chiang Kai-shek, the historical pattern of losing, people, Chinese leaders who lose a civil war, fleeing to Taiwan, and all of this happening in the context of new revolutionary fervor, ideology. All this was fueled into the 1950s, where also you had the U.S. and so basically you had this early event called the First Taiwan Strait Crisis. I'm not going to get into it really quickly. It doesn't really matter all that much. But the gist of it is that Mao started attacking a bunch of islands near Taiwan. Now we're all zooming in here for you guys. Mao started attacking a lot around Taiwan. I'm not going to get into it. Basically, the U.S. started to say, hey, we're going to nuke you if you keep doing this and keep trying to take over the island. And the gist of it, guys, the second Taiwan Strait Crisis, this is the late 1950s. The U.S. and China were not on good terms, right? China was strongly allied with the Soviet Union at this point until a little bit of a break between Mao and the Soviets. The challenge for China was that you had the United States there, and the United States didn't like what was going on in Korea. Mao was on the other side of that. They were actually fighting on the same thing. So really bad news. The U.S. had thought about nuking China during the Korean War. By the way, also people don't know, the U.S. was really thinking about nuking all sorts of things in the 1950s. It really kind of felt like the answer to a lot of U.S. problems, because the U.S. had now decided the whole world was its problem. But that's part of it. And so the gist of it, you had these 1950s challenges where fundamentally Mao, the new ruler of China, was trying to probe to understand what he could do and what the U.S. would do related to Taiwan. He wanted to know how far the U.S. would go to protect Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang. First of all, Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, these are super corrupt people. They were not these aren't great, amazing, liberal heroes of anything. And Chiang Kai-shek's wife had a really good play in different ways, and very good political figure, and did some interesting things, but to be successful to portray that image. But the gist of it, Chinese warlords, right? Mao, Chinese warlord. Chiang Kai-shek, fundamentally Chinese warlord who ruled as a de facto dictator of Taiwan for a long time. And I think his son did the same thing. And I think eventually Taiwan liberalized as it grew into part of this broader American alliance economic trading system. But early on, Mao was just trying to figure out what's going on. What can I do? Are you just going to let me, when are you going to let me do it, right? And so prom points in the Penghu, I might have pronounced that wrong. It's been a while since I've looked or spoken these words actually, but the islands near Taiwan. These are islands that China, major conflict, that China would, a staging operation, a staging base. And make sure I have it right here. The choice is narrowly, this is men here. Let's see it. This is Kinmen. Let me make sure. I mean, it has that same shape. Yeah, okay, we're here. So yeah, this is a major Chinese city in Fujian province. Also, the Fujian, Taiwan was also never administered as its own province. When I said it joined the Qing dynasty, it was administered as part of the Fujian province, which is across from it. This island, Kinmen Island, is part of Taiwan. So if you guys want to know I think I'll look at the comments in a second. If you want to know something China could do to really escalate, this island, I mean, this is something like Catalina off the coast of the United States, or Governor's Island off the coast of New York, something in the Puget Sound. I mean, this is very close. This is a piece of Taiwan that is very, 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 very close to China. Let me pull up for you guys. Let me see if I can pull up an image I have, just purely because it's funny. I'll pull out of this really quick. Oh, wait, here we go. So, yeah, so this is Kinmen Island. I'm going to pull up a quick picture of, let's see. Oops. It's in local. Okay. So I'm going to just pull up a quick picture of this island just to give you guys a sense of what we're talking about here. Let me do this. Right. So this is, like I said, Kinmen Island. You notice all of the paraphernalia and propaganda and all sorts of stuff put on this island. And this could be a smaller part of it. I haven't actually looked. It's actually a pretty big island, so it looks small. I'm pretty sure this is just definitely the island, just not the full one you guys see down here. It could be, I think actually maybe this, or it could be one of these, but gist of it is one of these. And this is how close it is. It is literally eye shot from China. So it is, to say that this is thumbing your nose at China is ridiculous. And to be 100% clear, a big reason why there's problems, there's a lot of these crises, is because Taiwan for a long time had a very vision of itself as being all of China, all this, and Taiwanese control over the islands, the Taiwanese Strait, the Taiwan Strait, and the islands right next to major city in Fujian province. These are not viable in any world, again, where the United States isn't playing this role of security overwatch in the region. So just to have a situation like this it's so unconscionable to someone like Mao that it precipitated all these crises where, there was almost nukes that got thrown around. Now that's a key thing to understand, right? So it got really tense, it got really heated, and we were in this new era where things were unknown. Mega powers had never involved themselves in China in this way. China had never been in a world where there were these mega powers, basically superpowers like the Soviet Union and the United States, and he didn't know it took everyone a while to figure out how to interact with each other, right? And the U.S. in particular, with this whole maritime dominance, it's hard to deal with for any country that, lives on near the water. And that was very important. So quickly what happened, China soon realized the U.S. wasn't going to budge. And during the Cold War, what the U.S. did was it adopted this policy that I mentioned earlier that is, roughly speaking, you could think of it as strategic ambiguity. So let's go back here. Let's get rid of these ships for now, but you guys got to remember that these are a real thing, and they are there, and they are important. They are the reason why all this happens. And again, sorry, a much better setup for all of the video and audio. Cool. I've been getting ready to set up this studio for you guys. It's just, everything is chaotic right now, not just in the world, but for everybody. But right now, let me pull this up for you. We got into this world of strategic ambiguity, right? So let me get this. Ooh, it doesn't want to work. 1 second. See if we can get. It's definitely a lighting problem. There it is. Where are we? So, challenge is what to do. You don't want to create conflicts. There's a whole new era, whole new system going on where you don't have familiarity with where you are. You don't have to know how to deal with these powers. The U.S. doesn't know how to randomly deal with former empires on the other side of the world. And so what the U.S. decided was strategic ambiguity, where it basically a game where it let the Chinese know that it would get involved in a conflict over Taiwan, but it wasn't going to start one. And it also wanted to make sure that everyone understood Taiwan to start one, right? It didn't want the Taiwanese to suddenly bank on U.S. support for them and then declare. That's a great way to just precipitate a conflict. So the U.S. had to play a tough balancing act between basically not telling China, and there's all these communiques and stuff it's not worth knowing about anymore. But I mean, it's interesting. It's just not tonight when we've already gone for close to an hour and a half. The point of it was that the U.S. was not admitting that Taiwan was a separate place. It was trying to allow China to have a lot of its verbal way about things, while the on the ground reality didn't shift. And the U.S. didn't want a shift on the Taiwanese side. It didn't want a shift on the Chinese side. And it had a lot of leverage over Taiwan, less leverage over China. It was able to make this work for a really long time. And that's the main story of the Cold War. And so I'll bring this back to the map because this is worth it. This is definitely worth it. Again, you guys, maps are the coolest thing ever. In the chat, like, if you don't think maps are cool, like, if you think they're cool, put a 1 in the chat, because I want to make sure that we're on the same page with that. And if you don't think they're cool, please ask me to prove that. I will make amazing things to show you that. Right now, we're just working with a quick base map, and we're looking at the world. And so one second. Right, where was I? We were in Taiwan. We were talking about the United States, and everyone was figuring out. There was all that. The change during the Cold War. This is the fundamental thing here. Taiwan was always poor. Taiwan was nothing for a long time. When it was part of China, Taiwan was barely occupied. Taiwan really became part of the modern world under Japanese colonization. In fact, Taiwan was the first part of China to industrialize and to modernize. It got coded in industrial ports, in railways, in electrical systems, in post offices, in everything. A lot of the great Western advancements in administration, in technology and transportation technology, communication, military, energy, everything was imported after the Meiji Revolution in Japan to Taiwan. And so Taiwan modernized a certain way. The other part of China that also modernized was actually Manchuria, and that's all fundamentally a Japanese thing. But Taiwan was different, and so that was when Taiwan became a part of something. But on its own, Taiwan was never part of anything. And so what happened, once there was more confidence about what was happening in Taiwan, right, that it had a position that, even though it was ambiguous, it was relatively stable. It began to really integrate into, and Taiwan stopped spending as much on the military, things stabilized. The U.S. military took the brunt of the load about what was going on, in any real conflict. Taiwan has increasingly just expected the U.S. to solve things. And the U.S. didn't want this, and there's all these reasons, but that's kind of the way things go, right? That's the way the cookie crumbles if fundamentally you're giving a security guarantee to a random island in the middle of nowhere, roughly speaking. That's what you're going to get. They're going to expect that you're going to come save them, and that's the trend. But Taiwan was able to modernize and really become an extremely powerful and interesting nation. And obviously powerful for its size. Right, we're not talking China, we're not talking the United States, we're not talking Great Britain, but it was able to integrate into Western networks in a really way. It became part of a whole. Again, the connection between Japan and Taiwan is crucial here. That connection reemerged in the second half of the 20th century, and then as China liberalized, what actually happened? This is part of a very interesting story that is undertold in the West, totally ignored in mainland China, is that Taiwan down here, you guys let me see, let's make this big. Taiwan down there, in China, and Taiwan, excuse me, Hong Kong down here, and Taiwan over here, which I just earlier described. By the way, if you guys just came now, you should check out the earlier part of this broadcast. You'll get a real deep, fluid understanding of what's going on here. And I know that there's really intense. In a little bit, I'm going to look at the news. We're going to look at really what's going on, because this is a live event. But everyone who's reacting to current events, if you're actually getting this understanding of things, you're playing a different game. You're playing a totally different game. And what happened, again, you're learning about the developmental story that made Taiwan possible, that could make Taiwan, like, what will happen if there is a conflict afterwards, when the dust settles? Could Taiwan reemerge? What's going to happen? I mean, these are much deeper questions that even right now in the conflict in Ukraine, nobody's telling you the truth about. Nobody's going to actually tell you the likelihood that something like that, a nice, happy, democratic Ukraine will emerge out of the smoke and rubble. But getting back to this, the development of Taiwan is interesting, and what happened, there was a connection again with Japan. There was a lot of their security guarantees, transfers of U.S. military technology and other technologies to Taiwan. Early Taiwan, through the first part of the second half of the 20th century, this was a dictatorship. It was focused on war with China. That became increasingly ridiculous. It loosened, it expanded, and commercial opportunities expanded. business development grew. And what happened when China liberalized in the late 1970s was that Hong Kong down here, with its British legal system, British maritime law, British commercial law, British legal system, British courts, a lot of British, a lot of real great benefits for finance and commerce that came with being a historical part of the British Empire. That was applied to China, basically. Hong Kong and Taiwan, which used to be these, what's that phrase? I can't remember the phrase, but basically these, Anyway, just these huge irritants to China as these places where foreigners, pirates, smugglers would gather and mess with China, just poke at it. They became huge, important conduits to the development and modernization of China. Basically, Taiwan provided a lot of technology and a lot of administrative and organizational capacity in the business and commercial side of human administration or whatever, to China. So basically it was providing the money. Taiwan was providing the money, and it was acting as a financial interface between mainland China and the rest of the world. And then Taiwan was acting as a technological and administrative and organizational intermediary, in addition to some finance, into Taiwan. So there was a triangle, really. Another video, I'll put up a whole triangle, I'll make a chart and a graph for you guys, but right now this is just some light background into the current event. The whole thing that's going on is that there was a triangle where the three parts of China, it's really a greater China, were part of one system. There was Taiwan, there was Hong Kong, and there was mainland China, and they were all working together. They were all getting rich together, right? So this is a huge story. This is a huge, huge story that's undertold, undersold, but it was part of a giant functioning system. A giant greater China functioned within a larger global system. This is what happened. When you had the strategic ambiguity, you had Nixon go to China. China joined the American global system. It put aside, everybody managed to find some agreement to leave things as they are right now for Taiwan, and then one day we'll come back to this. It is an issue. And then just to focus on development, focus on fixing, getting rich, basically. And that's what happened. That happened in Taiwan, that happened in mainland China, that happened in Hong Kong. And for a long time, everybody did well. The first sign that things were starting to fray after the Cold War had ended and the Soviet Union had fallen, 1991. Well, like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, you had 1989 in the early death throes of the Soviet Union, where basically you could say the Soviet Union was dead in 1989. There was the color revolutions, and there was the Tiananmen Square incident in China. All that was a problem. You had China reemerging. China's always been a part of the politics, but China really reemerged into U.S. domestic politics, early 90s. And then by the late 90s, there was another issue. This is the third Taiwan Strait crisis, where, again, let me know, guys. In the next broadcast, I'm going to put up some real transitions. So you'll have big, bold transitions for when I go from one topic to another as I lay through all this. I often like to give people more context because there's so much more that you guys deserve than what you're getting. So I'm trying to provide that here. And we're back, right? So we're back to this third conflict, right? You had the two conflicts in the 1950s. That enabled strategic ambiguity. You had a rapprochement between the U.S. and China. Things started to chill out. China was no longer worried about the U.S. nuking it all the time, and so on. And that was big. That enabled a platform for development, both within Taiwan, where it could liberalize its political system, and you had the massive integrated economic development of all of Greater China throughout this period. Great story. And then you had a crisis in the 1990s, which is basically the Clinton era. It's very similar to today, where you had a conflict between the Congress and the White House about something related to Taiwan, and it was specifically about the recognition of a Taiwanese official going to, I think it was like an alumni event at Cornell, whatever it was. It became a huge issue, and similar to Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan right now, and then China did a similar thing to what it's doing now, although more, less minor. But there was mass troops, again, Fujian province here across the coast. You have there's a lot of Chinese military bases here, a lot of expanded helicopter bases. They're going to need an air component to an invasion of Taiwan. Really, I'll do a broadcast on what an invasion is like, but I don't know if you guys checked out the TikToks or whatever I've done. This would be the most complicated military operation in a very long time. The only nation really that has done a relatively modern amphibious invasion of another country is the United States. And the United States actually did it on both on intercontinentally, right? It did an intercontinental amphibious invasion of Europe in D-Day, and it did a similar intercontinental amphibious invasion of Korea at Incheon in the 1950s. And that's crazy. Realistically, though, it had Great Britain as an aircraft carrier in Europe, and it had Japan as a staging ground in East Asia. So it was closer than you think, but still, amphibious operations incredibly difficult, and even the roughly speaking 100 miles of the Taiwan extremely difficult, extremely difficult to cross. And so back in the 1990s, during the third crisis, you had just a major third crisis. You had a major crisis, right? So you had mass troops, you had launched missiles, you had the House Speaker at the time. This is the last time this happened. You had Newt Gingrich going to Taiwan, and that's what happened. And you eventually had, like I mentioned earlier, you had two U.S. Carrier battle groups that sailed through the Taiwan Strait to basically show that the U.S. Could do its thing, and that the Navy was supreme, and da. And that was very different. This was a very different time. So things have changed, and that's what we're going to talk about now, because we are in, really, as we're speaking, there is live a fourth Taiwan Strait crisis. And in a little bit, we're going to go look at the news. But first, I'm going to give you guys the unvarnished commentary, right? So you see that I'm literally just looking at maps, right? I'm looking at maps and using kind of experience on this. There's big differences now, right? First of all, the U.S. isn't going to just sail a carrier battle group through the Taiwan Strait anymore, because that is not the way to go. Chinese military is way too advanced at this point to do that. Let me pop up really quick. Let's see some of these zones here. I think this should be it. Okay. So I'm not sure. I think this might be from Sub China. It's like a blog, so much appreciated. So this is basically, there's these air defense identification zones, and China now has a much more robust everything military. So Navy, Air Force, Marines, roughly speaking, Marines. Let's say Marines. Army Air Wing, particularly missiles. I can pull this up for you guys. In particular, the biggest change to U.S. global strategy, really, in a long time, it started really in the 1990s, in part because of this crisis. And this is the development of Chinese missiles. So everybody who's probably watching this channel has heard about this. There's really big Chinese missiles. Ooh, let me show these. Oh, this is a good one. Yeah. Okay, you guys are gonna get something good here. Oopsies. All right, pop this up. So, this is gonna be really big. Yeah. So here you have. Here, I'll actually just pull myself. Let's get myself up here. Nope. Oops. Jeez. You're getting there's a real thing here. Let's get rid of this. Anyway, this was an air defense identification zone, where it basically just shows that China has a air defense zone that includes Taiwan. This is part of a way to sort of, again, push people away from China, just have it become a bit of a fait accompli, get Japan away, get everybody away, and it wants people to respect these all these zones that it creates, right? So it wants to create zones in the South China Sea, which I'll look at in a little bit, and it wants to create zones in the East China Sea. It wants to do all that to push out the Chinese military and political authority out past the coast. It's a big challenge. We'll talk about this later, but first, missiles. Chinese regional missiles. So this changed the game. So look, you can see China now has missiles that go real far. And it's got a bunch of different missiles. And in particular, many of them are basically designed to attack carriers. And so starting in the 1990s or in the 2000s, the U.S. militaries and the navies had to try and figure out what to do against this carrier threat. This is a major it's a major challenge, right? Is it just what do you do, right? So what happened is that you had ICBMs that became, roughly speaking, easier to target, conventional missiles. I mean, accurate conventional missiles that could suddenly attack specific small things like carriers. That is a big change, because suddenly you have your super protected carrier, and the carrier has, like I said earlier, it's a carrier battle group. There's all these supporting ships that provide missile protection, provide all sorts of aid, and so there's submarines often, there's destroyers, and they're all there to protect the carrier, because the carrier does all the power projection. But if you can just rain missiles down on the carrier battle group, carrier pass through the missile defenses, that's difficult. And so China's heavily invested to try and, in a lot of ways, prevent the U.S. from getting through the Taiwan Strait. Just doing those sorts of things, basically, that happened during the third crisis, where Clinton basically just sailed right through the Taiwan and humiliated China at the time. I was going to pull up more missiles for you guys, but there are so many missiles. Anyway, so the point of all these missiles, and the point of all this is that after the third crisis in Taiwan, Taiwan Strait crisis, things changed. China started modernizing at a crazy rate. In the 1990s, China was an underdeveloped mess of a country with a joke of a military, to be honest. And China learned this during the first Iraq War, where the U.S. just obliterated Saddam Hussein's military, and it basically showed China that the military it had constructed would just be annihilated compared to modern U.S. military operations, which were extremely precise, networked, joint, and in particular facilitated space systems, communication, targeting, positioning, control, all of it, imaging, all of it. It's huge. And so what happened, actually, a lot of the Chinese rockets today, they need space-based rockets to basically, I mean, they need space-based sensors to actually do the final targeting. So in any conflict between the U.S. and China, you're going to see satellites get blown up, right? Because that would prevent a lot of these rockets from hitting carriers. And you're suddenly in a world, right? So you're looking at maybe the GPS system gets hit, and it gets all these countries can attack other countries' satellite systems. And as for people who don't know, GPS is used. I mean, we all know this, but we kind of forget that GPS is used for literally everything. It's used for timing in particular. A lot of things that are timed, digitally, networked. I mean, it's literally everything. It'd be a disaster if that ever happened. But so the Chinese were modernizing. It's not the same. China was early on the development process back in the 1990s, right? It is now at its end game. So it is way developed. I mean, also these cities like Xiamen in the 1990s, this was nothing. The city did not look like what I put up earlier. It was not filled with giant glass skyscrapers. Very different. So China is modernized and industrialized, and its military is a very, very different beast. It's a very different beast. It's not up to taking Taiwan, as I've been alluding to, because you have to actively deal with the U.S. Navy. That's difficult. That's dealing with a Navy that's way more powerful than every other Navy, and most navies put together. So I mean, some people think all navies put together, so it's intense. That's really tough. I mean, you are really pushing for something difficult if you're trying to do that. But it's up for a lot of things, and like taking that island like Kinmen, that's different. But more importantly, get to at the beginning of the broadcast was that the politics in China have really changed. So now that we're at the end of the development cycle, we're really, let me try if I can get this to line up again. No, honestly, changing the lighting seems to work sometimes, or it doesn't. Anyway, closer to the end of this broadcast here, but China runs on nationalism. That's fundamentally what happens now. And now that economic growth is fading, now that political tensions are rising, economic tensions are rising within China, the Communist Party is forced to find things to rely on, because it's been, for decades, it's run on growth. You don't have electoral processes in China. You don't have representative processes. You don't have any of those political things that we associate with people being happy and accepting of their government. What you do have are results. You had outcomes. You had money, basically. People were getting rich, or at least enough people in their lives were becoming better that things were changing. That's different. So, you have a cult of personality in China again. This is typically what happens. You know, the state needs a figure. It needs to impose unity. It needs to impose it within the political structure, within the Communist Party itself. Also within amongst other nations, right? You need an emperor type figure. It's not nationalism. Needs images of strength. It cannot look weak, right? It can't be seen to be pushed around. And like I showed you guys earlier, you look back at this, and which is, in this bay here, this island is this whole with Taiwan, right? And if you just compare it with the United States, doing that really quick, it's worth doing that. United States. As always, you can see me there in Los Angeles. Honestly, that's something that's relative. I mean, one is a cod or something, maybe. Yeah, I mean, you can think about I think this is a good one. Staten Island. Staten Island was a part of, Britain or something. That would be something similar. Guys, the fine structure of New York is extraordinary. I'm going to talk about that sometime. Yeah, and try to think place in the world that we can relate to, that China thinks of Taiwan similar to. It's centered around the world again, guys. Down here, on the coast of Chile. The only tribes can relate it crazy, kind of similar to how tribes. It's just definitely Cuba. This is a similar island here that can block trade flows of the, and that has basically been a thorn in the side. That was the phrase I was looking for. A thorn in the side of the United States for a very long time, on and off. Less particularly during the Cold War, particularly during imperial era, extraordinarily angsty relationship here. This is the thing that's most similar to the United States. I mean, imagine if China owned Cuba. This is the Soviet Union story. It is enough to, or imagine if there's an American Civil War and for example, the South lost and they fled to Cuba and took it over, and then and the British protected them or something. I mean, this is similar to what we're talking about. It's not about being right or wrong here. It's about why people do what's going on. So we're going to get over this Taiwan thing ever. But also it has to do something. Much better position economically. Like I said, it's in a much better position militarily. But the U.S. is still the top dog. It still has an insane military. It's gotten a lot better. And everybody is revved up as a consequence of the Ukraine conflict. So Taiwan is getting revved up. The United States is getting revved up. Part of what's happened with Pelosi even being in Taiwan is that basically what you have is the American political left, the institutional left that's in authority and in power, the Speaker of the House, is in no way, just trying to make a statement by going to Taiwan in the first place, to show solidarity with democracy, to stand up to China, to do many different things, political elements of political speech and action at once. And once China says more, suddenly it's a battle of wills. So early on in this conflict, Biden was like, we really shouldn't do this, right? Everyone could hear the news. Like Biden was kind of like, yeah, please don't. You're going to cause a problem, and I already have a problem. I already have a headache in Europe, and now you want to cause me a headache in East Asia, and I have a constant headache. I'm like 87, right? I'm too old. Why are you giving me all these headaches? But it didn't matter, right? And then as this happened, the Biden administration changed its tune. So it's changed from, don't go there, to she can go if she wants, right? She can go if she wants. Well, why, right? Basically, because you can't be seen to be obeying what Beijing wants to happen, right? That's not kosher. That's like, kowtowing to the great phrase, what they used to do to the emperor, kowtowing to Xi Jinping in China. It's very similar to debasing yourself somehow in front of Putin right now, as in how that would play in a lot of ways in American politics. This is not good. Real tension. Real tension. It really is call what's happening the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis. And we're going to see this play out. Pretty soon I'm going to transition here. I'm going to look at some stuff before eventually signing off. But in general, the U.S. is now just totally fed up with China. The American population, most importantly, is specifically fed up with China more than every other country. The U.S., I'll say that again, the U.S. population, the electorate, is specifically and directly angry at China more than every other country, more than Russia in general. It's bipartisan. That's something that the American politicians are just taking in, right? So if the U.S. population is fed up with China, so is the U.S. political class. And it's unwilling to be seen, to be pushed around. And Democrats in particular want and need to be seen as strong on China after what happened in 2016. And it's true. And the truth is the Biden administration is as tough on China in a lot of ways as Trump was. A lot of more conservative followers will disagree, but this is the truth of what happened. This is the truth of what's happening, even if the spoken rhetoric and the talk of removing certain tariffs and stuff is happening. It's a different situation right now. We have major inflation, and we actually have a reorganization of global supply chains. It's not just like even this talk about inflation, guys, is not what you think it is. This isn't like recession and inflation. This is a reorganization of the structural arrangement of global economics and production everywhere in the world. Like if you were an intense Mark talking about oh God, what's the language again? I don't even remember anymore. The transformation of the means of production or something. That's what's really going on. It's a total transformation in things. And so there's an mass economic dislocation and mass transportation and productivity dislocations and shifts going on because it's all rearranging. And what it looks like on the outside is very different. But to call it a recession and to call it just inflation, we're missing a lot of what's going on. If we talk like that. So getting back to it, Democrats, with all this crisis going on, Democrats aren't going to be told. Nancy Pelosi is not going to be told where to go by authorities in Beijing. And what's unfortunate here is that the Chinese political system, like I said, it's consolidated around one person. And when Xi Jinping and Biden talked, they spoke, and I'm sure Xi Jinping said, "Tell her not to go to Taiwan. What is going on?" And he said, "I can't." She never listens to me anymore. It's been years since Nancy has listened to me, or whatever he says. And she doesn't believe that. I mean, it's a very different system, right? She can tell everyone what to do, anyone and everyone what to do. And the fact that Biden, they're in the same party, they've known each other for decades, the understanding in particular at the height of the Chinese political authorities, there's a whole class of advisors and mandarins basically around that know more. But their willingness to accept elements of the American system, very, very limited, right? It's very similar to how many elements of the United States and many people and parts of the government are unaware of the realities of the Chinese system. There's a similar thing going on. There's this hardening of understanding and this ossifying of our ability to not empathize, but to put ourselves in the position of another country, another leader, etc., and to see what's really going on. And of course, the optics of it all, as always in politics, it always makes it even more difficult. Ukraine has reset expectations to kowtow to China over Taiwan right now in the context of Russia invading another country, and Russia and China kind of both knowing for a long time that they wanted to invade these sorts of countries and kind of looking at the other to say, "Oh, that's how you did Ukraine. Oh, maybe I could do Taiwan like that or whatever." Like that's a little bit of what's going on. This is different, right? And a lot of this ambiguity has been peeled back as a result of all this era of ambiguity that I was talking about, that big compromise you had in the 60s, 70s, etc., where you were allowing for this platform for things to come together and for this development platform in the second half of the 20th century to pull up Taiwan and China and all of this. That's all fraying. So you can't really go back to what we had before. We cannot go back to it. We also, once more, don't know what we are going to have going forward. So it is a massive problem. And this is the challenge, right? And Biden has already gaffed, or whatever he's doing, gaffed, not gaffed, and said, we defend Taiwan. And then all the staff have to go, "Oh, I don't know, we just meant the same thing as ever, but he's just kind of old," whatever. That's not the point of it. The point is that this whole framework is eroding away. And Japan has already said it would join in a conflict in Taiwan. So let's pull this down for you guys real quick. I said this a couple times, but here's Japan. Comments here. Guys, oh yeah, wondering what this stream is about. So this stream is about Taiwan, and we're talking about the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis, and in particular, the roots of the conflict between Taiwan and China, the historical basis for it, the recurring pattern of it in history, and a broader context for what we see now, so we can get beneath and to the roots of the crisis that's going on. And in particular, we're talking about the broader reconfiguration of the political and economic world around us and how this conflict fits into that, so we can get, again, beneath these headlines and know what's going on, so we can predict and make better plans and processes to have better outcomes in the future. I mean, this is what we're trying to do. And so that requires a lot of context. And that's what we're doing. So like I was saying, the Japanese thing here, Japanese islands, after World War II, actually the U.S. in Ryukyu Islands for a while, then it to Japan, and this is another site of conflict. Let me pull up the good old air defense identification zone that Taiwan is obsessed. China is obsessed with. So out here, I'll show you guys this really quick. This is another one of these air defense identification zones. China's been popping these up a lot lately because it's trying to push out from its coastline towards, right, to give itself influence in different regions. And in particular here, it is trying to push out to the Ryukyu Islands, which are administered by Japan. They were given back to Japan, I want to say like early 1970s. I could be wrong about that. They were administered by the U.S. military or in the U.S. I think it was like the Ryukyu administration, but they were part of Japan. And Japan and Taiwan functionally are part of the same archipelago system. And I don't mean like geologically or whatever. I just mean functionally, geographically. I'll pull this down now. Geographically, this is all part of one thing. So the reason Japan is getting involved in any major attempt to Taiwan, China has to get to the backside, has to get to particularly some ports and some hidden aircraft, air bases, submarine base. I mean, Taiwan's actually building its own domestic submarine right now. There's a whole program for that. Another thing China's want to happen, but you have to get to the backside of Taiwan for a while. Like, there's this big spine, and Taiwan has known for a long time that it has more insulation and protection from a Chinese assault if it has key facilities located on its eastern coast. Truth is, Chinese military is so preponderant, massive right now. It's like that. It's not as important, but in general, to actually get to the backside of, for its own operations to land, to conquer these again, like here, China needs to get these Ryukyu. I might not know, but pretty sure this is, I want to say Yanagashima. Let's pull up. Right, to be wrong. I don't know how big that island is without labels. Ooh. Yanaguni. Yeah, there it is. Yanagashima. But yeah, so this is an island administered by Japan. This is how close it is to Taiwan, right? So this is why recently Japan has been said it would get involved in a real conflict between and China, and of course the U.S. aiding Taiwan in this conflict with China, because functionally any attack on Taiwan would lead to impingements of the Japanese island system, and slowly the U.S. you'd have to take a bunch of these Ryukyu Islands. Either you'd be opening yourself up as China to attacks from Japan and from U.S. forces based in Japan. There's no way that you wouldn't have to secure a broader region. And so in Chinese strategic thinking in general, this is called the first island chain. This is basically, China knows that if it ever wants to be a great, free, powerful, independent China that can roam the world free on the range, China on the range, it would have to get past this first island chain. And in military, this is the Chinese phrase in particular, get past the first island chain, has not succeeded at all. Again, Taiwan is the link, as you can see just visually. If China wants to let's do it, by all means. The U.S.'s experience in the Philippines, I really can't imagine why any country would want to do it. But anyway, Taiwan is really this linchpin in this whole island chain, right? Obviously, no one's ever conquered the Japanese whole islands, but in particular the Ryukyu Islands, parts of the Philippines, and then Taiwan, huge. This would allow the Chinese breathing space, the ability to move out from their coast and not be so easily interdicted and compromised by foreign powers. It's a huge thing for the Chinese. And that's why Japan would get involved. And again, there's these historical links. Really shouldn't be denied anymore. I mean, you could go read articles and stuff. I'll link, if anyone's interested, send me a comment. I'll link some articles that just talk a bit about this connection between Japan and Taiwan. It's really important. I talked a couple parts about it, right? I talked about the early industrialization of Taiwan. I talked about its connection early on, its development to Japan, as Japan was sort of offloading lower skill work from the main islands to a nearby region in Taiwan, kind of using those early and oldish colonial connections. There's a lot of infrastructure and stuff that literally on Taiwan was built by the Japanese. So that's important. Even South Korea has started adopting a lot of American language on the whole Taiwan plan. And the gist of it is that with the whole craze going on, the whole way that China would try, again, like I said at the beginning, the TLDR of this episode, this broadcast, is just that the whole plan for unification is falling apart. The other linchpin here is that nothing uses more energy than war. And the moment there is a war over Taiwan, Chinese energy sources would be extremely compromised. We're already in a world where right now we're not going to get into energy politics right now, but there's a bit of a discount for oil heading to China right now because there's so much of it. There's a glut of Russian stuff and China's taking it, et cetera. But as oil and gas resource and everything starts to compromise in the world that's coming, starting a massive war and having your energy supplies interdicted is a big conflict, because let's say you're in Japan, China and Taiwan, forget the United States. Japan gets involved because it has to, because it's right here and it has these islands, and it functionally allows China to get closer and closer to it. Let me show you again a picture of the conflict zones that I'm talking about. So there's the air defense identification zones that China talks about, and there are, how big is this? Uh-oh, guys. Oh, wow. Let's see. You guys just get only the best for my followers and subscribers and everything. Okay, so here's 2 air defense identification zones. And for people who don't know, what the Chinese military does is it constantly pings some different parts of, right? It's constantly forcing Taiwan in particular, but also Japan, to scramble aircraft to deal with potential invasions of their sovereignty, their airspace, right? It's a very common Chinese tactic. And this is one of the things that's going to happen as this, what I've been seeing, describing as a crisis, continues to evolve and progress. Is a natural thing to do, right? You're also, in China's case at least, you're also weakening and testing the resolve, the mental resilience, and you're also disrupting the training patterns and the habits of everyone who's part of the Chinese and the Taiwanese military. It's actually all very, very useful. But anyway, this map here, let me make it a little bit bigger. This map here is a map of the Japanese air defense identification zone, and then the Chinese one. This is again these East China Sea region. And again, they overlap, right? They overlap, and even look, you can even see it overlaps a bit with South Korea. But again, South Korea, U.S. ally, has stationed U.S. forces in the region. Japan, U.S. ally, stationed U.S. air and naval forces in particular in the region. So China's been pushing out, and this has just naturally led to a conflict zone. There's also in this map a noted offshore oil field, as everyone is rapidly realizing, right? Energy politics are here to stay. We're not heading to a green revolution right away. It is just, it ain't happening anytime soon. And as a result, this stuff matters. But yeah, so we have this zone where they're already in tension and in conflict. And that is important. I mean, these are inherent places for tension. And this is one of those things where the U.S. has been providing a security overwatch for a very long time. And for people, I mean, everyone knows their history, but we've forgotten. It's just been so long. I mean, Korea and China, these 3 countries do not like each other. They have gone to war so many times, in so many forms, forever, for as long as they've been around. Korea formed its identity in contrast to China. They all have an inherited administrative tradition, legal, written, political tradition, all originally came from China, because China was the first place in the region to expand demographically and to experience the agricultural revolution, which came with a whole host of transformative technologies that were just much easier to import from China than to redevelop the wheel by yourself in Japan or Korea. So there's that connection. Similar to Vietnam in many ways, where I don't want to zoom in on it because the thing, way down there, Vietnam, again, 1,000 years of occupation over 4 major periods by China, and formed its identity in opposition to China. So there's a whole region here where you don't see a regional grouping of countries that are organized around a central country. They're organized in many ways against a central country. And historically, China has been so unbelievably chaotic and violent that it's been broken into so many pieces. Like I said earlier, people just joined in on this broadcast. The biggest myth about China is that there is one China. And this is the reason why Taiwan is such a touchy issue. It exposes the truth that there is more, again, not like politically or whatever, just functionally on the ground, there's more than one China. There's always been more than one China. And until the recent modern era, the last few decades, there was never even a fully national economy throughout China. It was only ever regional economies and all these various little regions that had their own cultures, languages, identities, even ancient pre-existing civilizations. So that is that story. And so when you look at this map here, I mean, you see a region that without a U.S. presence, the U.S. military, engagement and behavior all around the world. There's a lot of people who have strong opinions on it, but these countries here, if they all had militaries, they would all be fighting each other. They only ever fought each other. And what has changed? If you go to any of these countries, if you talk to people from these countries about people from other countries, from these other countries, come on. I mean, again, people who are Chinese or Japanese or South Korean, in the chat, you can say, like, admit, parents say about people from Japan, right? Or say if you're South Korean, or if you're, if you're Chinese, what people say from Japan. It's the same story, right? It's the same story everywhere. And again, it's very similar with Taiwan as well, where the creation of a Taiwanese national identity. This is a process where we assume that a national identity is like a God-given thing, and it just emerges and it exists for one people, or it doesn't for another people. But the truth is that a national identity emerges, and it emerges through conflicts, and it emerges typically through violence, warfare, and a fight for identity, land, and blood and soil, terribly enough to say it. That's the way it happens. And so you're seeing that in Ukraine. You're actually seeing, since Crimea, the creation of a Ukrainian national identity. It's not that they're like, oh, Ukrainian national identity was really stronger than we thought. That it's being forged right now. That's in the last couple of years. That's really what's going on, particularly right now. And there's a similar thing if people, for example, I have friends who are Taiwanese. If you listen to what they say, if you say that they're Chinese, for example, and they say, no, I'm Taiwanese. I grew up in California, and that is what I heard basically my entire life. Oh, you're Chinese? No, I'm Taiwanese. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And these things harden over time, right? And if you are, say, from Taiwan, or your family's from Taiwan, or you grew up in the United States or Western Europe or Canada or whatever, the very fact that you're this underdog is part of this constructive process of your broader group identity. It is. It's similar with Palestinians and in Israel, where the increasing predominance of the Israeli military, security infrastructure, security forces, and the imbalance in the military capacities of the two regions, it's actually strengthened in many ways a Palestinian identity, regardless of what's happened to the broader previous pan-Arab appreciation for this issue. That still is a major factor. And there's a similar thing with Taiwan, where it's been the development of China into such a massive and successful country in this economic and industrial modernization. It's seen that has done a lot to actually precipitate its own transformation of identity in Taiwan. It's kind of the way these things work. And anyway, it's interesting. But point being, Taiwan is even, again, part of this quadrangle of 4 Northeast Asian countries that do not like each other in a lot of ways. Taiwan and Japan are probably the two that have the best relationship. I mentioned this little secret Easter egg from this broadcast for everyone who's made it this far. This is the secret Easter egg. And if you want to talk about one of the more important relationships for the next 10, 15 years in East Asia, it's this one. It is between these countries, right? It's become, functionally countries, Taiwan and Japan. Taiwan is an island. It has a colonial history with Japan. It was historically well integrated with a lot of technical processes and organizations and production methods, companies doing business in Japan and then all around the world. There's a lot of connections here. There's cultural ones too. I think someone in the comments, I saw someone wants, link some articles. So another time I'll definitely send that out. I'll put it in the comments probably when this is over. What else do we see here? Oh, geez, we got a lot of comments this time, huh? Taiwan #1. Need to recognize China is the province of great nation of Taiwan. That's actually funny. So, by the way, comment from Rye87. We need to recognize that China is the province of the great nation of Taiwan. That is actually funny, and but it relates to a lot of that sense of Taiwanese pride. That's a very real thing, as he is making light. And so we have. What do we have? Right at the beginning, Americans start wars, Taiwan belongs to China, it will be unified soon, right? You got to make that happen. Did you think Pelosi made China mad enough to do something? Definitely, but what something, does something mean full-on war? No. I'll give you guys a quick example of what something probably means. Uh, yeah. Okay, so let's do this one. Check this out. So this here is a map in, let me make this a little smaller. Oops. All right. Ooh, I kind of want to like put it over Taiwan. That would be kind of cool. Hey, let me try and do that. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's kind of sexy, guys. What do you think? That's kind of sexy. I'm pretty proud of that. That's cool. Okay, so yeah, so the gist, what do you have here? We have the internal waters of Taiwan. Actually, what does it say? I think it's the internal water. Anyway, it's basically the internal waters of Taiwan. And then in red here, this is, these are planned drills that China has announced since Pelosi landed in Taiwan. These are drills that surround, military drills that surround Taiwan and that touch into a lot of its waters. And the point being, China trying to basically encircle Taiwan with military operations to show how it can just envelop it and that nothing could protect it and da-da-da. One of the big challenges with this is that there is, like, right in the problem for China, like Upset Walrus was saying, like, do you think they'll do anything? You know, you do have one of the most important political figures in the United States in Taiwan. So, you know, if you do anything to her, to whatever, that's creating a massive crisis. So obviously the U.S. Didn't exactly help things here, but this is what the first stage of China's response looks like. And I gotta say, guys, I'm very proud of putting this graphic on here. The long-term vision for this channel is to really put together these high-quality broadcasts where we have these really sophisticated maps and layers of maps kind of all on top of each other, showing you every piece of the world, right? And so to build our model of the world, what we actually need is maps, like lots of, because literally the matrix of history is the map we see on Google Maps. So it's not just one map, it's actually all of them together. It's like, you know, there's that line, some old Polish diplomat or something, he said, the map is not the territory. It's very true. But if you have lots of maps, lots and lots and lots of maps, and you're stacking them all together and overlaying them, doing that, you're actually getting pretty close to the territory. So I'll pull this away. I'm going to go on a little brief philosophical digression here, but this is the territory. We actually have real-time satellite observation of the entire territory. And I mean this all. There's many things going on, like when I'm talking about national identities, culture, all these very different. There's a level of this that is abstract and not planet, but the territory itself, which we can actually look in a way that has never been possible. And I actually have a fun little video with that coming out. It's called The Power of Map. This weekend. It's come out on YouTube. We're going to go back to it. What else do I want to cover here? I'm going to go through a couple more of these. Pelosi is crazy, though. Who has control over those little islands on the left? I don't remember when you asked that, she. But, yeah, these islands, if you're looking at this now, that's Taiwan, right? These are the Penghu Islands. I can't remember the actual pronunciation. Been a while, but so Taiwan, and this is a huge problem for China. They've bombed this, I believe, in the 50s. They launched a bunch of missiles at it. Again, it's gone. The mining the Taiwan Strait, interdicting traffic in the Taiwan Strait. This is something that hurts China. It hurts China more than Taiwan, because Taiwan you can get to bases, shipyards, ports, whatever, at the bottom and on the top. You can basically go around it. I mean, China has access because it has its butt is to the Taiwan Strait. So those islands are Chinese. I mean, hello, Bisky, how are you today, random people? Why no updates? Da, da, da. It's a shame we didn't. China might look like Japan, or said if we did nuke them. Yeah, so here's a crazy misconception, guys. Everybody always talks about how the U.S. lost China. This is an old thing. They say the U.S. lost Red China, right? The U.S. lost China in the 40s and 50s. Let's say China had been, here's the thing, here's a really key thing. Everybody's got to know. The oopsies. Okay. I hope I didn't. Okay. So in the 1940s, in the 1950s, let's say the Kuomintang had won, right? The nationalists who fled to Taiwan had won, right? And the Chinese communists wouldn't have been able to flee anywhere because the U.S. has all the waters. You could have flee old or whatever, had to flee into Siberia or maybe lose. You're going to die, actually. All of you are going to die, most likely. So the Kuomintang had won. And now China was blue China, right? It never joined with the Soviet Union. Well, we still have a problem. China does not have the internal capacity to see the sort of development that allowed it to modernize like it did the last few decades. It needed to join in with the U.S. system that gave it access to foreign markets, foreign capital, foreign resources, and safe, secure trade routes to allow it to tap and access and transact between all of them freely and easily. It's never existed in Chinese history or world history, and without that, you can't have the sort of China that we see today, right? And that's key, because the other part of the story is that back in the 1950s, if the U.S. had China in the system, it had won, the Chinese Civil War had gone the way the U.S. wanted, we still wouldn't have been able to actually, China still wouldn't have been able to develop the same way, because China is so large, and to actually have China develop at the same time that Japan, that Germany, that France, all of Europe was developing, it wouldn't have worked. First of all, it was early, it was before many elements of the modern system came together. So containerization, a lot of the information technologies that enable the global supply chain system, to actually really do it for China. It would have been a very different pattern of development. There would have been mass poverty in a lot of central China. There wouldn't have been the same capital that you could put to this project. It was caught up in the projects, the Marshall Plan in Europe, the defense projects against the Soviet Union in the Cold War, Japan, all this. It was very different. And in particular, the Chinese population is so large that you're looking at adding into the world economy and trying to bring into, let's say, the middle class, a nation that had as many people as, hard to remember the numbers at the time, but roughly speaking, Europe and Japan, right? You would have been doing double of what was happening in the first place. So you actually couldn't do it. What I'm getting at is that you actually had to stagger the development of different countries. And so I get to the front of the line, trying to get there first. And part of what happened since the 90s in particular, is that China got there first and actually inhibited the development of a whole host of countries, because it found its niche in the global system and then just so dialed up just so dialed it up that no other country could try and get in sort of at the bottom of the manufacturing value chain. China was just monopolizing many of the areas that other countries would use to start bootstrapping themselves up in the development process. That's a huge thing that happened. And so in the 1950s, it was really bad. And also the super military dictatorship, China would have ended up very similar. I mean, this is one of those key things. When I said earlier on that China won't experience democracy in your lifetime, China's not structured for democracy. I don't mean anything in terms of the capacity of people who are ethnically Chinese to, be wealthy and democratic, right? You can see that everywhere in, particularly the west coast of North America, all throughout Southeast Asia, parts of Europe, etc. That's clear. It's a dumb question. But what is the key question is there a world where a unified mainland China can itself be successful and democratic? And the answer to that is no. Unfortunately, it's not possible, because there's many structural factors that make it difficult. In particular, the need for extreme political control over a massive, typically deprived population makes it very, very tough to have the sort of wide economic and social and stable social structure that enables something like, let's say, American democracy. This never existed in China ever, and there's not even a past history of anything like a Rome or a Greece or an era of, Republican or democratic virtue. Part of the Chinese cultural identity, the only association aside from ancient sages and mythical emperors, is the modern Republic of China, which, the first one, basically just immediately collapsed, right? Or when rogue, and now it's associated with Taiwan. So all that is bunk in mainland China at this point. There's not even a history of it. And that's a really key thing. So like the person who asked the comment that I went off on, it was basically like we should have nuked China, and that would have enabled a better pattern of development than what you see as a result of the Communist Party. Well, crazy as it sounds, the Communist Party, given the hand that was dealt it, its ability to basically go 1,000% towards industrialization, gave it, on the whole, some much more impressive outcomes than a lot of people were predicting. If you look back in the 1990s, what people were saying about China, they did not think it would get this far. And I'm very convinced that there's massive trouble, that the fall of the Chinese state and the fall of the collapse of China is basically going to be more impressive than the rise. And that's really unfortunate, because historically it's a very impressive thing that happened in China, this whole modernization, and to see it come to pieces is going to be one of those other real difficult ideological challenges for everyone around the world. Because a lot of people, let's say, who are very into the Green Revolution, stuff like that, the ability of a state like China to execute these massive projects, which is what would be needed to effect the sort of changes that we would need to really improve the planet, like people say we need for the Green Revolution type change. If China can't do it anymore, then no one can do it in a lot of ways. That's kind of the story here. So there's going to be a major line in the potential, in the faith in people have in American global, administrative and technical capacity, which is pretty bad. So I'll just bring it back before I check out some websites really quick, do some final rundowns on some of the stuff that's going on. So now what, right? I've given you guys a huge background on China, on Taiwan, on the history of their kind of messed up relationship, where it stems from, what's propaganda and what we talk about, what isn't, what stuff's been really interesting and different today versus what's part of a really old historical pattern. And now it's kind of like where things are headed. So now what? Right? So U.S. and China relations, U.S.-Chinese relations, they're on a permanent downswing. I have a whole podcast where I say this is the trade deal during the late Trump administration. That's the last major quality agreement you're going to have between the U.S. and China. Even that really wasn't followed, but still, it was an attempt at getting things done together. And now we're in a world where the Chinese economy is a mess. A war would really shut it down. But underneath the surface, Chinese politics are cracking. They're really cracking. So this is a really tense time. And the fundamentals, though, they haven't changed. The U.S., China can't win this fight if the U.S. gets involved. It definitely will struggle to win this fight if it doesn't have the element of surprise, and it can't sort of act before the U.S. can involve itself. That's tough, and the Chinese Communist Party can't afford to lose. So I've been saying for a long time that the party's running on nationalism, that it's running on its ability to get things done, and now, in particular, on its ability to recreate. The phrase for Xi Jinping is to rejuvenate the great Chinese nation, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And you can't go lose your first war. And people may not realize, for all the improvements and advances in the Chinese economy, the Chinese military, it has still not fought a war with modern technology in like 40 years. Really, the last time it fought a country was was Vietnam in the late 70s, and even then it wasn't really a full fair fight. So China's never done a major operation, and now would have to do, like I said, probably the most complex military operation in decades. This would be, again, the U.S. Afghanistan, actually relatively easy. The most difficult part about it is just the location. Iraq, more difficult, but amphibious operations, the sort of joint use of in particular air and sea assets, the process of forming the beachheads, of resupplying the forces, of progressively encircling the defender, of dealing with any other parties that might get involved. This is huge, right? The U.S., when it had its wars in the Middle East, it had no one that kind of prevented it from doing what it wants to do, right? You're talking, I'll go back to the map here, like I said, in an invasion, you'd have all these countries that get involved, like all want to see China kind of get its comeuppance. You have the U.S. involved. This is just, it's so messy. The military part of it is just super messy. The politics behind it, incredibly messy. The economic instabilities that would stem from it, result, really bad. In particular, the energy and probably the food issues that would just skyrocket after this, pretty unmanageable, particularly in the world that we're in now with inflation and beyond inflation, absolute material shortages, right? So a lot of categories of things for most of the world are moving from they're really pricey to I can't get them at any price. That's a big shift that's happening now. So a lot of what we're going to see, and I hope this is right in the sense that the world could get really dark if it isn't, but we should see mostly gesturing and posturing. right? We should see mostly gesturing and posturing, because there's a limited number of things you can do, right? When the only thing that can do anything is really just to do a real attack here. So I'm gonna pop up some websites here. Let me see here. What do we have? Okay. Let me pull this into the bottom so I can see. This is a Chinese nationalist rag, basically. It's called the... Oh, whoops. Oh, I just put on the... Hello. My bad here. We just had something that started running. I hit a thing there. So, yeah. Missile drills on the east of Taiwan. That's one thing. Provocation over world into age of disorder. That's actually an age of disorder happening. Let's see what else. And so this would be the reason why am I looking at this website. So this would be the place where very strong nationalist opinions they're likely to voice themselves, right? Right. So it's basically saying anything that happens is the U.S.'s fault. There won't be a one-off. It's going to be something big. Mainland China, so it's suspending imports of citrus fruits, some frozen fish from island of Taiwan starting from Wednesday, right? So it's trying to punish Taiwan. Minor missiles, stealth fighters, violent foreign minister, everybody's favorite. China speed up unification process. China summons U.S. ambassador overnight. So a lot of this is pretty normal. I mean, normal in the sense that China recognizes the constraints here and the limitations. The Chinese army will take Pelosi's visit. It's consequence. This is a bad translation there. But also that could be the crazy political you see in China right now. So overall, let's see what the most viewed is. Speed up unification. Yeah, most of it is just stern warnings. A lot of talk here, right? So what we're looking for is what walk is there. Oh, whoops. Do I not have this up? Oh, you guys, I didn't even have it up for you. That is pretty bad, huh? Let me pull this up. Oh, so I triggered this. So let's see here. Let's see. Oh, weird. Okay, let's get rid of this. Hold up. God, it's so annoying when you have to do... So we have two of these. I'll just pop this off. Nope. It really wants to stay, huh? Well, that got... Here, we'll try this one. That should work. Okay, so we'll just do this. I'll do it in a different one, a little bit more fun. Let me pop up in the other one I had. Okay, so what I was showing you guys earlier, I'm also getting tired here, so I'm going to end this really quick. I got to go to sleep. Busy week, big days. So I have this little offset because I was doing it a bit differently in the other, but this is fine. Let me see if I can zoom this. How is it? Is it? Nope. Either way. Anyway. Ooh, there we go. We're getting closer. Ooh. Nah, it's not worth it. Ooh, there it is. I finally moved it. Okay. Just wanted to center this for you guys. Anyway, point of what I'm saying is that you had both basically talk. This is the rag I was talking about. This is the nationalist rag, former People's Liberation Daily or whatever. You have drills, you have angry, you have launching missiles and suspending fish imports, etc., using strikes, and the most viewed, speed up reunification process, mostly nothing crazy. So nothing crazy there, although you have to look at the time. What is the time in Beijing right now? Yeah, so it's midday, so we could be hearing things, right? Beijing can't stand in way of more U.S. visits. China vows military operations around Taiwan in response to Pelosi visit. Again, more normal stuff here. A lot of this is actually giving This is the South China Morning Post. I think it's owned by Alibaba now. It's actually relatively good from a non-propaganda perspective. You get good bits of stuff that come in. Yeah, it's basically mainly explaining the Pelosi perspective on things. Shows her wearing pink, all that, nothing crazy. I'll pull up the New York Times really quick. Let's see. So interesting thing here is just that this is U.S. domestic politics, and you have just American domestic politics here. So you have primary results in different domestic elections, and you have to get down to here to get to this, right? Taiwan seriously undermined Chinese sovereignty, U.S.-Chinese relations. A few high-profile events. So a lot of this will depend on what the events are, and every event, everything she does is going to be scrutinized. It's just sort of like one of those really intense social events where you have to see what every single person is doing, right? Oh, what is she saying with this outfit, or what is he saying by not having arrived at this time, et cetera, et cetera. This is the kind of thing we're seeing here. So visit to the legislature, visit this. Just to give you guys a quick example of something, this is what China thinks of some of Taiwan's activities here. Here it is. So this is a simulation. It's gonna probably be really big. Yeah, as always. This is a simulation, Chinese military drill simulation, where that's basically a replica of I want to say the Taiwanese presidential or legislature building. Let's see, Taiwan legislature building. Can't spell, but yeah, Taiwanese legislature. That's that. You can see at the bottom there, it has that giant thing. Anyway, so this is a image of Taiwan. Basically, they built a replica of this building in China, probably Western China, and they're preparing a simulated attack on it. A lot of this, though, is really just, I mean, a lot of this is propaganda stuff, right? This is to put in online rags and stuff to say what you're doing. But point is, we're getting it takes a while to even get to live fire military drills. And there's just analysis. They're talking about how Pelosi's been doing this for a long time, vis-a-vis kind of hitting China where it hurts, live fire drills, other countermeasures. So we're going to see more about all this. I'll give you guys this is a good military website, military affairs, called the Drive, and it'll have typically has good collection of a lot of open source intelligence, a lot of military guys, economic guys on Twitter. So we have here, there's a live view of Pelosi in a tweet coming down. This is the plane landing. I'm not going to play that one. Lots of plane landings. This has probably been updated consistently. So we're just going to run through this, and we're going to call it a night, guys. I'll give you a quick conclusion. I'll tell you what's coming. But this will be cool. Everyone's like, Jason, you always just give all this context. Like, what? Tell me about the real event right now. All right, we're going to do it. All right, Pelosi landing. These are these guys. I mean, these are tracking the planes. People are very into this. The pink. Everyone's loving the pink. Here's her tweets while she's there. She's really, banking on her profile here, right? America's solidarity as the world faces a choice between autocracy and democracy. It's a common thing right now. We're seeing the battle for freedom around the world. That's how it's all being described. And this is one of the more high-profile things she's done in a long time. Minister of Foreign Affairs. And by the way, Taiwan doesn't get this sort of stuff off. And everyone, you just assume, everybody is always, everybody is always, Taiwan hasn't had this sort of recognition. So you don't get ambassadors, you don't get people arriving and even interacting with you very often. Hang on one sec. Pull that away. Should you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. So this is a big deal, right? Big deal for Taiwan. It's a huge deal. And here we go. Taipei 101 is lighting up, right? The tallest building in, let's see if you guys can see this as I click it. Look at that. They're lighting up the tallest building in Taiwan to say hello to Nancy Pelosi. So rough Mandarin translation. Thank you, Friends of Democracy, for supporting. Yeah, okay, there you go. There's all this. Here's the Global Times. This is a very common thing. People are into this stuff. You're always tracking what the population say. So in general, guys, tip for the world we live in. It's very good instead of like knowing your resources. Again, although for institutional resources and commercial publications, stuff like that, like the Wall Street Journal or Nikkei Asia or whatever it is all around the world, what you want to do is get a sense for what the more left-leaning publications are focusing on and talking about and considering. And you also want to focus on what the more right-leaning focus and stuff is considering, and then also more of a moderate business. And you actually want to see the full spectrum. And so typically, if you're looking at South Korea, you can do that. China, you can do that all around the world. And it's very helpful when you're trying to navigate our very difficult informational landscape these days, doing it like that. All right. Right. Okay. So people have been pointing out just the route that Pelosi took to Taiwan. Here we go. It's an acknowledgement that, that it's trying to not really get too close to China. This is also a big thing. So you see, as I said, the Chinese military has strongly modernized. And one of the most important things that's changed for China is that it actually has aircraft carriers. Now, China doesn't have really functioning naval air wings. It doesn't have the aircraft that you need to have a really advanced, multi-role, highly functional carrier strike group. But it does have the carriers to start with. And so this is very important. A lot of people who are just commenting on it, they'll assume that these are just like the American carrier battle groups. No, they'd get destroyed. But they are the sign of a very big change. And in a few years, again, if life would continue the way it is and all these trends we see now would just continue forward, we could talk about a world where this really, really matter. Right now, though, it's a PR thing, it's a propaganda thing, but it's very important because it does show that change, right? These are carriers, right? It's not just the U.S. that can send carriers through the Taiwan Strait. Right. And so again, this is the U.S. this is the U.S. Air Force and naval presence in the region, right? You can take off from Japan and do all sorts of things to support all of this. Again, the U.S. military here, there's a very, very important U.S. elected official in Taiwan right now. The entire U.S. military is highly activated right now. This is the part of it. So this is why it's so dangerous for China to do something right now, right? So you're seeing it, a lot of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance aircraft going around. These are people who track the location of aircraft. This is cool. We're not going to get into this, right? Again, tracking stuff in the Western Pacific. That's all fine. So this is also, like I said, mostly a military-oriented website. But this is actually what we're concerned with, right? The major escalation here would be a military one, right? There's not much leverage in other ways. So there's not leverage that matters, right? So they're just talking about what's happened, what we'd be looking for, or is there big news, right? Do you see anything? This is actually a very good one. So I showed you this earlier. This is the current. In red, you have the military exercise today, and then you have the ones that China did in response back in 1999. It's showing how the Chinese ambition, sense of confidence, and military capacity is way bigger than it was. All right, so we're doing all that. Yeah, so yeah, this shows a bit more of them. So when you actually look at it, though, it was similar in sense, but here the big difference is really that it's just going farther beyond to the backside of Taiwan to just show it that doesn't have that protection it used to think it did. And here's this, similar to the one I showed. Actually, I could have got my image from here, from one of these other ones. Some other tweet, right? So you're going to see, this is important. So there's the massing of troops over into Fujian province. Of course, there's already a big military component there, but it's very hard to do a lot of this logistics. Like I said earlier, it's very mountainous in this part of China. Really just massing on the spot, thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of troops is very tough. But here's this. This is what we're looking for here. This is what we're looking for. How many people do we still have in this? Anybody here? Yeah, we still got some people. Let me see. These are new comments. Links from Pelosi. What is this? Pelosi. Okay. Let's see. Yep. So here we have. Oops. tanks. All right, tanks on the beach. Tanks on the beach. Yeah. There you go. That's a real supply line. Anyway, hard to know from any of this if it's masked in an operationally useful or effective way, but we're getting some inkling of it. Again, heading on trains, missiles, to ballistic missiles heading in, although most of these ballistic missiles they can hit from a lot of places. Again, Xiamen, that's the city right across from China, from Taiwan, Fujian province. It has that island, Kinmen Island, right next to it. So if we were to see a military op that would be local and could somehow be, justified, I mean, it would be this island. We'll see, but yeah. Anyway, this is just mostly look at all the equipment that's being massed. Here we can see it again, guys. The ability of social media to make things look bigger than they are, right? People are doing that intentionally to build clout, build brand recognition, expand their reach, all that kind of thing. There's also the use by governments and other people who are trying to make their activities seem impressive, and we're very impressionable. We're seeing 10, probably 10 tanks or something moving, but it looks like there could be hundreds, and our brains are naturally inferring all of this, but we don't know, right? We don't know. Here we go, Fujian. This good though. Province for loading with military equipment, right? High rise, yeah. So this is the major PLA. We got staging areas. Again, evergreen intel. These are again these open source intelligence stuff has really come into its own during the Ukraine war. So the ability, again, this is another thing, the ability of average people, of particularly corporations, to integrate together all this stuff, particularly to have it all mapped, to have, like, for example, the staging area, to have even what you could do, you could have these images, like you could have these social media images geolocated in an area with a timestamp. You could do some AI processing of the number of tanks, of the number of things. You could start to make calculations actually about the movement of things. I mean, if the NSA or the CIA, if any of the American intelligence agencies were really using advanced AI for cool things, you'd be doing some stuff like this. We'll see how much. Probably done more in financial shops, places are giving strategic advising advice, stuff like that. Anyway, it may indicate that we'll see. We should see some major aircraft maneuvers, but we're going to see, again, this is really preparing for the major exercises they're going to do, the drills and all that, all around Taiwan. Right, take further steps, live this, live that, and that's where we do it. So we'll see, right? In the next few days, I think these events are going to happen. I mean, these drills. But that is mostly it for tonight. I'm gonna end here. Give some final context, talk about what's coming up, both in the world and on this channel. So, key takeaway here: if China does do something, it's because it's desperate, right? This is a key fundamental reality of China right now. If it's going to do something, with the U.S. all energized, with the war in Ukraine happening, with real antagonistic relations between it and everyone around it spiraling, it's because internally it feels it has no choice. Either the options or the outcomes it's expecting within China are getting so bad that it feels like this is useful. It's useful as a PR ploy. It's useful in other political ways. That's happening. But either way, the end is coming in China, right? And this could spur it along. This could help prolong the current system in the way it is if things go really well somehow. But the probability of that has gone down dramatically. So, I mean, this is really the point. I mean, if anyone thinks we're still going back to the world of 2019, look at this, right? And so for businesses still in China, it's like, do you really think this is going to get better? Just remember that everyone in Russia lost everything. Like, all your assets are gone. They don't belong to you anymore. You're not getting any insurance. There's no institution in the world can help resolve any of your problems or disputes. And well, things are heading that way. So that's where we are. We're in a new world. We are in a totally new world. In this world, which is one of the key themes of this channel, is that this world is actually new to us, but familiar to all of the humans of the last 500 and really the last couple thousand years. This is the world we have today is a development, as a cumulative development, starting at the bottom with the agricultural revolution. Well, first humans becoming modern anatomical humans, then the agricultural revolution, and then we had a lot of the transportation system revolutions, in particular maritime transportation, blue ocean sailing, deep water navigation, all of that. Those are big. And then, of course, you have the industrial technologies, all the tools of the industrial world. And finally, at the peak, you have our modern digital systems, including artificial intelligence and everything else that goes with computers and semiconductors, which, of course, is where Taiwan is critical. So if we want the world, the super advanced world that we have, where the Apple machine that I have on my desk in front of me and that many of you might be using, or even doesn't matter if it's Apple, like any advanced computer, any advanced phone you might have in your pocket, you need Taiwan for that. So Taiwan has become very critical in the modern world that we have. And I didn't quite get to that story, but I mentioned a bit of it, which is that platform for development, the technological base that developed in Taiwan that actually went out and did a lot of contract manufacturing in mainland China and maintained a lot of the core specialized knowledge for itself and moved up rapidly up the value chain, like rapidly up and really into really advanced electronics, and ultimately into the semiconductors that power them, and where TSMC in particular is the most impressive semiconductor manufacturer in the world. And so you cannot lose TSMC without losing basically the progress we're seeing in modern information and computing technologies. So that's an important part of the story, you know, and it's the truth for China as well. Actually, China wouldn't be able to. Again, it's that thing. China being desperate because the potential for a technological revolution, a digital revolution, digital electric, autonomous cars, smart city, all that would just disappear if you don't have the chips to make it possible. So we are in a new world, and keep tuning in, guys. I'm going to throw up really quickly one of my favorite little things here. Pull this back. And let's see. Yep, so you guys should just definitely check out. You got to check me out. Oops, you don't have to check me out. Please don't check me out. Let's see. Weird. Oh, there it is. Yeah, check me out on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram. And what I want to pop up is I have a YouTube thing, the actual one. Where is it? Wait. There it is. It got moved somehow. Ugh, it's always a challenge. Anyway, check it out on all these things. Subscribe, check them out. The world's totally changed. Things are really transforming, and I'm here to provide that context. Right? We don't all have the time to go look at everything in the world, and I've spent that time, and now I can share this knowledge for you quickly and efficiently so you can make better decisions and have better outcomes. So it's great. Subscribers, community members here. We're building a community where we can talk about these things, where I can answer questions, we can develop our models and knowledge of the world, and have a sense for history, have a sense of what history is and where we're headed as it happens all around us, which is an incredibly exciting thing. And ultimately, we're going to need people who have a sense of the world and why we're here and what's happening to help us get through things. So I really hope and I appreciate everyone who's here, everyone who's commenting, everyone who's supporting this channel. Very important. Definitely subscribe, definitely share, like it, send it around, because there's a lot of great content coming up. There's a really cool episode coming out about forming new cities, and should we build cities here on Earth, new ones, like I said in the middle of our broadcast, or should we build them on Mars, right? Is that a total fantasy to build cities on Mars? Is it a waste of human resources? Why don't we build, or in general, why don't we build new cities on the Earth, right? What's happened? What's going on? What prevented this? And why did it happen in China also and not other places? So that's that. We got that. There's more about wars, about new technologies, the industries of the past and the future, all the conflicts around us. It's going to be great. So send me your questions. Just like in the comments, I'm going to start adding in more community features, more interactive stuff. There'll be time during broadcast to take questions. You'll be able to come on. I'll be answering more stuff in the comments. People could even come on Zoom. We'll see. I'm going to knock out anybody who is just disruptive and a troll. There's no point in that. It's exciting, getting a real conversation, real movement here to understand the world and to not just be beholden to all these corporations. Because I said earlier, you want to get underneath what the institutional corporations are telling you. And if you want to trust somebody, trust a person, trust an actual person who you can see real time. Nothing faked, nothing created here behind the scenes. You're seeing the sausage being made, so to speak. You're seeing this whole thing happen as it is, so you can know that it's real. And that's why people ask me, why are you doing the broadcast? Why don't you just, talk to, the consultant work you do during the day? Why don't you do all the produce stuff you also do? All that. It's because this matters to build the relationship and to show people, right, how things really happen, and that you can actually trust someone authentically because you see who they are. Very important stuff. And yeah, we're going to get past these bland, fake, superficial headlines and learn the meat about what is going on in the world. So with that, guys, it is late here in the West Coast. And with that, until next time, I'm out, and I will see you guys